Hi guys, tonight we're stepping into the entire history of spices. Those tiny seeds, bark curls, roots, berries, and powders that somehow persuaded humans to cross oceans, build fortunes, start wars, and pretend a pinch of pepper was a reasonable retirement plan. Imagine your kitchen in darkness, a jar opens, and suddenly the air changes. Warm cinnamon, sharp clove, grassy coriander, smoky cumin. Why did these little fragments of plants become more precious than silver? Why did kings, sailors, monks, healers, and merchants chase flavor as if it were a map to paradise? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is, because somewhere, someone is hearing this while rain taps the window, or while the whole house has gone quiet. Now, dim the lights. You begin far earlier than empire, earlier than silk robes and marble palaces, earlier even than writing itself. You're standing near a fire in a world without recipes. The night is wide, cool, and full of animal sounds beyond the glow. Smoke curls into your hair. Damp earth presses under your bare feet. Meat, roots, and wild grains warm over embers. And the air carries that ancient smell of ash, fat, leaves, and stone. No one here says the word spice. No one has a tidy little rack with matching labels, because apparently civilization had not yet reached the sacred achievement of alphabetized paprika, but hands are already searching. Fingers crush leaves. Teeth test seeds. Someone notices that one plant makes the mouth tingle, another calms the stomach, another covers the heavy smell of food kept a little too long. This is where flavour begins as attention. You learn by watching elders, by tasting cautiously, by remembering which berries made someone smile and which berries made everyone agree, silently and forever, not to eat those berries again. The first seasonings are not luxury. They are survival, medicine, comfort, warning, and curiosity. Wild garlic, mustard-like seeds, juniper berries, minty leaves, bitter roots, aromatic resins. These are not yet cargo. They are part of the landscape, gathered with the same patience used for firewood and water. A mainstream fact sits quietly in this smoky scene long before written history. Humans used plants not only for food but also for healing, scent, ritual, and preservation. Archaeologists have found traces of plant use in ancient hearths and dental remains, though the evidence is often delicate, like a whisper caught in dust. Burned seeds can survive. Pollen can linger. Starch grains can cling to stone tools. From these fragments, scholars build cautious pictures of early taste. It is not quite the dramatic treasure hunt of cinema. It is more like someone squinting at a microscopic bit of residue and saying, with scholarly dignity, well, this might be garlic. History can be glamorous in very small ways. You crouch near the fire as someone drops fragrant leaves onto hot stones. The smell rises green and sharp, cutting through smoke. A child laughs. An older woman presses a bitter root into warm water and gives it to someone with a sore belly. The drink is unpleasant, naturally, because medicine has always enjoyed being rude. Yet the person drinks, and later, perhaps, feels better. Memory forms. This plant matters. This taste means care. This smell belongs to safety. In the long human past, taste is never separate from belief. A strong scent seems powerful because it changes the invisible air. Resin burning in a cave or shelter feels like a message to forces no one can see. Fragrant smoke may keep insects away. It may cleanse the space. It may simply make people feel less alone beneath a sky crowded with stars. You feel the warmth on your face and the cold at your back. The oldest contrast in the world, firelight and darkness, known and unknown. There is a quirky little possibility here, beloved by people who enjoy imagining prehistoric dinner parties with too much confidence. Some researchers have suggested that early humans may have used aromatic plants partly to impress others, not only to improve food, a good-smelling hearth, a special bitter drink, a rare seed brought from far away. These could signal knowledge, skill, or connection. So yes, Even in deep prehistory, someone may have been quietly showing off with seasoning, not loudly, of course, just enough to imply that their roasted tuber had notes of forest and superiority. Still, historians and archaeologists still argue whether the earliest use of spices was mainly practical, symbolic, medicinal, or simply delicious. The problem is that taste disappears, a pot can break and remain, a bone can fossilize. But a smell rises, pleases someone for a moment, and vanishes into air. The past is full of vanished aromas. To study early spice use is to follow shadows of scent. As you move through this ancient landscape, you notice how flavor teaches geography. Certain plants grow only in certain soils, certain climates, certain seasons. A sharp seed from a dry hillside, a sweet bark from a damp forest, a resin from a tree wounded carefully so its fragrant tears can harden. People begin to know places by what they smell like. The riverbank smells of reeds and mud. The woodland smells of mushrooms, leaf rot, and wild herbs crushed underfoot. The coast smells of salt fish and drying seaweed. Each place gives its own taste. Then comes sharing. A traveller arrives carrying something unfamiliar tucked in a pouch or wrapped in leaves. The group smells it first. Of course they do. The nose is the cautious gatekeeper of the mouth. The stranger has brought seeds that warm the tongue, or dried leaves that sweeten a stew, or resin that burns with a clean, bright fragrance. The object is small, but the effect is large. People remember the traveller. They remember the path. A mental map begins to form, not of borders and kingdoms, but of useful smells. This is the quiet beginning of trade. Not ships yet, not coins, not warehouses guarded by men with ledgers and serious eyebrows. Just exchange, gift, obligation, curiosity. A handful of seeds for a tool, a bundle of leaves for a story, a fragrant gum for a favour promised when the rains return. In this way, spices begin their first journey through human hands. You walk on as dawn softens the horizon. Birds call from brush. The fire has collapsed into red beads of heat. Someone grinds seeds between stones, and the sound is steady, sandy, almost sleepy. Scrape, press, turn, scrape, press, turn. The smell lifts slowly, warmer now, released by pressure. This small act, grinding a seed, is a kind of transformation. The plant becomes powder. The powder becomes taste. The taste becomes memory. There is no empire yet, but the foundation is already here. Humans want food that comforts them. Humans want medicine that might help. Humans want scents that make the unseen feel nearer and the dangerous feel farther away. Humans want rare things, especially when another human has them. A spice is never just a spice. It is a signal of place, of knowledge, of care, of status, of mystery. And so you remain beside that ancient fire, breathing smoke and crushed leaves, feeling the rough stone in your palm, listening to the soft murmur of people who do not know they are beginning one of history's longest stories. They are only making dinner. They are only trying to heal a stomach, sweeten a bitter mouth, bless a night, hide a smell, charm a guest. Nothing grand, nothing imperial, not yet, but the air has changed. A seed has travelled. A memory has formed. Somewhere beyond the dark trees, another valley holds another flavour, and sooner or later, someone will wonder what lies there. You walk into a world where cities have begun to rise from river mud, sun-baked brick, and human stubbornness. The air is warmer now, thick with the smell of clay walls, grain dust, animal hides, and smoke drifting from crowded cooking yards. Somewhere nearby, water moves slowly through irrigation channels. Reeds whisper. Donkeys complain, because donkeys have always understood that civilization means heavier loads and fewer naps. Here, in the ancient lands of Egypt and Mesopotamia, scent becomes organized. It is no longer only a handful of leaves dropped into a pot. Aromatic plants are measured, stored, traded, offered, burned, and written down. You pass through a market at dawn, while the sky is still pale and cool. Baskets sit in rows coriander seeds, cumin, garlic bulbs, onions, fennel, sesame, dates, dried herbs, and lumps of resin wrapped carefully against dust. Fingers dip into sacks. Merchants lift pinches to the nose. Buyers do not only look, they breathe deeply, judging freshness by fragrance. In Egypt, the Nile gives rhythm to everything. Flood, planting, harvest, tax, always tax, because even paradise apparently needs paperwork. You step into a kitchen courtyard where bread bakes against the wall of a clay oven, beer ferments in jars, sour and yeasty. A cook crushes coriander and cumin with a stone pestle. The sound is dull and steady like a sleepy heartbeat. Garlic hangs in bunches, sharp and earthy. Onions are sliced, releasing a sting into the eyes. The food is simple, but not dull. Lentils, fish, bread, beer, herbs, oil. The flavours are direct and alive. A mainstream historical fact settles into the scene. Ancient Egyptians used spices and aromatic plants in food, medicine, perfume, temple ritual, and embalming. Their world loved fragrance. To smell pleasant was not merely vanity, it suggested purity, health, divine favour, and social order. Priests washed, shaved, and entered sacred spaces scented with resins and oils. The gods were offered incense, food, wine, and flowers. A temple without aroma would have felt unfinished, like a banquet without bread, or a royal decree without someone dramatically sealing it. You enter a dim chamber where workers prepare fragrant mixtures. The air is heavy with myrrh, frankincense, cedar oil, cinnamon-like bark, and other imported aromatics whose exact identities can still puzzle scholars. Resin sticks to the fingers, oil gleams in shallow bowls, linen rustles softly. The Egyptians believed the body needed careful preservation for the journey beyond death, and aromatics helped protect, dry, honour, and transform. The scent is solemn but strangely comforting. It makes the room feel less like an ending and more like preparation. A quirky little possibility here, beloved by people who enjoy imagining prehistoric dinner parties with too much confidence. Some researchers have suggested that early humans may have used aromatic plants partly to impress others, not only to improve food, a good-smelling hearth, a special bitter drink, a rare seed brought from far away. These could signal knowledge, skill, or connection. So yes, even in deep prehistory, someone may have been quietly showing off with seasoning, not loudly, of course, just enough to imply that their roasted tuber had notes of forest and superiority. Still, historians and archaeologists still argue whether the earliest use of spices was mainly practical, symbolic, medicinal, or simply delicious. The problem is that taste disappears. A pot can break and remain. A bone can fossilize. But a smell rises, pleases someone for a moment, and vanishes into air. The past is full of vanished aromas. To study early spice use is to follow shadows of scent. As you move through this ancient landscape, you notice how flavour teaches geography. Certain plants grow only in certain soils, certain climates, certain seasons. A sharp seed from a dry hillside, a sweet bark from a damp forest, a resin from a tree wounded carefully so its fragrant tears can harden. People begin to know places by what they smell like. The riverbank smells of reeds and mud. The woodland smells of mushrooms, leaf rot, and wild herbs crushed underfoot. The coast smells of salt, fish, and drying seaweed. Each place gives its own taste. Then comes sharing. A traveller arrives carrying something unfamiliar tucked in a pouch or wrapped in leaves. The group smells it first. Of course they do. The nose is the cautious gatekeeper of the mouth. The stranger has brought seeds that warm the tongue, or dried leaves that sweeten a stew, or resin that burns with a clean, bright fragrance. The object is small, but the effect is large. People remember the traveller, they remember the path. A mental map begins to form, not of borders and kingdoms, but of useful smells. This is the quiet beginning of trade. Not ships yet, not coins, not warehouses guarded by men with ledgers and serious eyebrows. Just exchange, gift, obligation, curiosity, a handful of seeds for a tool, a bundle of leaves for a story, a fragrant gum for a favour promised when the rains return. In this way, spices begin their first journey through human hands. You walk on as dawn softens the horizon. Birds call from brush. The fire has collapsed into red beads of heat. Someone grinds seeds between stones, and the sound is steady, sandy, almost sleepy. Scrape, press, turn, scrape, press, turn. The smell lifts slowly, warmer now, released by pressure. This small act, grinding a seed, is a kind of transformation. The plant becomes powder. The powder becomes taste. The taste becomes memory. There is no empire yet, but the foundation is already here. Humans want food that comforts them. Humans want medicine that might help. Humans want scents that make the unseen feel nearer and the dangerous feel farther away. Humans want rare things, especially when another human has them. A spice is never just a spice. It is a signal of place, of knowledge, of care, of status, of mystery. And so you remain beside that ancient fire, breathing smoke and crushed leaves, feeling the rough stone in your palm, listening to the soft murmur of people who do not know they are beginning one of history's longest stories. They are only making dinner. They are only trying to heal a stomach, sweeten a bitter mouth, bless a night, hide a smell, charm a guest. Nothing grand, nothing imperial, not yet, but the air has changed. A seed has travelled. A memory has formed. Somewhere beyond the dark trees, another valley holds another flavour, and sooner or later, someone will wonder what lies there. You step onto the Malabar coast, where the land meets the Arabian Sea in a long green sigh. The air is heavy, wet, and alive. Coconut palms lean over sandy paths. Backwaters glimmer in the morning haze. Rain gathers in the leaves and falls in slow drops, though the sky is already cleared, as if the forest is still thinking about yesterday's storm. The smell is deep and layered salt, wet bark, fish drying near the shore, wood smoke, crushed leaves, and somewhere in the green shade, the sharp, warm scent of pepper. Black pepper does not look like an empire maker at first glance. It is not gold. It does not shine. It does not sing. It grows on climbing vines, small and patient, wrapping itself around trees and supports in the humid heat. The berries hang in clusters, green at first, then harvested and dried until they wrinkle into dark little beads. Honestly, they look like something swept from the corner of a storeroom. And yet, when you crush one between your teeth, the whole mouth wakes up. Heat blooms slowly, not like fire, but like a lamp being turned up. You walk through a pepper garden while the ground gives slightly beneath your feet. The leaves are glossy. The trunks are damp to the touch. A farmer lifts a strand of pepper berries and tests them with an experienced eye. Harvesting requires timing, too early, and the flavour is thin, too late, and the berries lose the quality traders want. Hands move carefully, gathering the spikes into baskets. Nearby, someone spreads them to dry in the sun, and their colour begins to darken. The scent grows stronger, earthy and biting. A mainstream historical fact rests here among the vines. Black pepper from India, especially the Malabar region, became one of the most important spices in ancient long-distance trade. It moved by land and sea toward Arabia, Egypt, the Mediterranean, and beyond. In Roman times, pepper was imported in large quantities and became familiar enough that it was used not only by elites, but also by people who were simply trying to make dinner taste less like boiled regret. You follow the pepper down toward a coastal market. Boats shift in the water, their ropes creaking softly. The port is busy without being frantic. Men carry sacks on their shoulders. Women bargain over rice, coconuts, oil, and fish. Foreign traders stand beneath cloth awnings, their clothes smelling faintly of sea salt and old wood. Languages overlap in the humid air. Tamil, Malayalam's ancestors, Prakrit tongues, Greek, Aramaic, Arabic, and others may swirl together depending on the century you choose to breathe in. Trade is rarely quiet. It is a human tide of pointing, weighing, mistrusting, smiling, and pretending the price offered is personally insulting. Pepper travels because it has rare qualities that people far away desire. It is light enough to carry, durable enough to survive long journeys, powerful enough to change food with a small amount, and strange enough in distant markets to feel luxurious. A sack of pepper is compact wealth. It can sit in a storeroom and wait. It can cross water. It can pay taxes, settle debts, and flatter dinner guests. These are useful talents for a berry. In a shaded warehouse, you watch pepper being measured. The sacks are rough beneath the hand, woven from fibre, smelling of dust, plant oil, and spice. A merchant pours the pepper into a balance scale. The berries rattle like dry rain. A scribe notes the weight. Someone checks for dampness, because moisture is the quiet enemy of profit. Someone else watches for adulteration. Tiny stones, old berries, or cheaper seeds might be slipped in by the ambitious and morally flexible. There is nothing modern about fraud. Humanity discovered trade and very quickly discovered suspicious accounting. A quirky tidbit follows pepper through many centuries. It became so valuable in parts of Europe that later medieval writers sometimes called it black gold. And peppercorns could appear in rents, gifts, and symbolic payments. This does not mean every peppercorn was treated like a diamond, despite what dramatic dinner table trivia sometimes suggests. But the idea captures something true. Pepper was small, desirable, portable, and deeply connected to status. Imagine paying rent with seasoning. Your landlord arrives and says, "I accept 3 pounds of pepper." Suddenly the spice cupboard feels less cosy and more financially alarming. You board a stitched boat preparing to leave the coast. The hull smells of timber, coconut fibre, tar, and bilge water. Pepper sacks are stacked carefully with other goods: ivory, textiles, pearls, rice, perhaps cardamom, perhaps ginger, perhaps local woods and resins. The sailors watch the sky and the wind. The monsoon is not just weather. It is a calendar, a road, a risk, and a promise. Seasonal winds can carry ships across the Arabian Sea, then bring them back months later. You feel the deck shift under your feet as the boat rocks against the tide. The sea breathes heavily beside you. For merchants, pepper is part of a wider Indian Ocean world. Long before European oceanic empires, sailors from South Asia, Arabia, and East Africa know how to cross these waters by stars, wind, memory, and inherited skill. Ports are connected like beads on a string, Museras and other Malabar harbours. Arabian ports, Red Sea stations, Persian Gulf cities, East African coastlines. Goods move, stories move, words move. Cooking habits move too, which is secretly one of history's most effective invasions. Yet scholars still debate the exact locations and importance of some early pepper ports, especially the famous Museras, celebrated in ancient texts but difficult to pin down with complete certainty. Archaeology, old maps, poetry, coins, and imported pottery all offer clues. But river mouths shift, coastlines change, and busy ports can vanish beneath silt, vegetation, and modern settlements. The past likes to hide under parking lots and coconut groves. Very inconsiderate. You imagine a trader arriving after weeks at sea. His clothes cling with salt. His lips are cracked. His cargo smells of pepper so strongly that even the ropes seem seasoned. At the port, officials inspect the load. Taxes are calculated. Brokers appear, because wherever goods gather, middlemen bloom like mushrooms after rain. Pepper changes hands, and with each exchange, the price grows. By the time it reaches a faraway table, the little berry carries the cost of farmers, packers, porters, sailors, guards, interpreters, scribes, storms, bribes, storage, and everyone who felt they deserved a small fee for standing nearby. Still, when it reaches the cook, its purpose becomes beautifully simple. A pinch over lentils, a handful in a sauce, a sharp note in meat, fish, vegetables, wine, or medicine. Pepper can warm the body in humoral medical traditions. It can cut richness. It can awaken tired food. It can make a winter meal in a cold country feel touched by southern heat. You remain for a while in a coastal house as rain begins again. It taps leaves, roofs, baskets, and the packed earth outside. A pot simmers over the hearth. The smell of coconut, tamarind, fish, and pepper rises into the dim room. Steam beads on your skin. The spice does not feel like treasure here. It feels local, ordinary, intimate. It belongs to the soil and the rain. It belongs to the hands that pick it, dry it, grind it, and scatter it into food without ceremony. And yet this humble heat will travel farther than most kings. It will slip into palace kitchens and soldiers' rations, monastery stores and merchant chests, medical texts and tax accounts. It will become so familiar in distant lands that people forget it came from vines growing in wet green shade beside the Arabian Sea. The peppercorn rolls in your palm, dark, wrinkled, weightless. Then you crush it, and the air sharpens. You enter a landscape of warm rain, bright birds, and trees whose bark holds a secret more powerful than it looks. The air is soft and damp, carrying the smell of wet leaves, sea wind, flowering shrubs, and wood freshly cut by careful hands. Somewhere beyond the trees, waves fold against a shore, steady and pale under morning light. You're in the fragrant world of cinnamon and cassia, where sweetness clings to bark, and where confusion becomes almost as valuable as truth. Cinnamon is strange because its treasure is hidden under plainness. No jewel hangs from a branch. No bright berry announces itself. The spice lies in the inner bark of certain trees, curled, dried, and transformed into delicate brown quills. You touch a strip between your fingers. It is thin and brittle, smooth in some places, rough in others, with a scent that seems warmer than the air around it. Sweet, woody, golden, slightly sharp. It is the smell of comfort now, but for much of history it smelled like distance, money, and someone refusing to tell you where they bought it. You walk among cinnamon trees in Sri Lanka, known in earlier texts by names that shifted with language, tree, and imagination. The island is green with monsoon life. The soil is dark. The leaves shine. Workers cut young shoots and peel away the outer bark. The inner bark is loosened with patient pressure, then lifted in strips. As it dries, it curls naturally into quills, each one light as a whisper. The work is skilled, intimate, almost musical. A knife scrapes. Bark separates with a soft rasp. Rain ticks on leaves overhead. The scent grows stronger in the humid air. A mainstream historical fact takes shape here. True cinnamon, associated especially with Sri Lanka, and cassia, from parts of South and Southeast Asia and China, were traded across ancient and medieval worlds as prized aromatics. They appeared in food, medicine, incense, perfumes, and religious offerings. To distant buyers, the difference between species was not always clear. Names wandered, merchants generalized, customers sniffed confidently, because confidence has always been cheaper than botanical accuracy. Cassia is thicker, stronger, and often more pungent than delicate true cinnamon. It comes from related trees, but its bark behaves differently. In many markets, both could be sold under overlapping names. The ancient buyer might not know whether the fragrant bark came from Sri Lanka, southern China, the forests of Southeast Asia, or a trader's extremely flexible imagination. Yet the scent was enough. It warmed wine, sweetened medicines, perfumed oils, and added mystery to ritual smoke. You move into an ancient port where cinnamon-like bark changes hands in bundles. The harbour smells of salt, tar, wet rope, fish, and spice dust. Traders speak softly under awnings because valuable information prefers shade. A merchant opens a package and lets another man inhale the goods. There is a pause, a nod, a tiny drama of nostrils and suspicion. The buyer asks where it came from. The seller gives an answer so poetically vague it could mean anything from beyond the sea to please stop asking expensive questions. This secrecy was not accidental. Traders often protected supply routes with stories. Classical writers recorded fabulous tales about cinnamon's origins, including accounts of giant birds carrying cinnamon sticks to high nests, which brave collectors then tricked into dropping them. This is a wonderfully ridiculous image. Somewhere in the ancient imagination, Enormous cinnamon birds are ruining architecture with fragrant twigs, while merchants nod solemnly and raise the price. It sounds absurd, but it served a purpose. If customers believed the source was dangerous, distant, and nearly impossible to reach, they were less likely to bypass the middleman. Another tale claimed cinnamon came from remote lands guarded by fierce creatures, or gathered through perilous tricks. Such stories floated through the Mediterranean world because few buyers could verify the truth. Geography was patchy, maps were incomplete, ocean routes were controlled by those who knew the winds. A fragrant bark arrived, and beyond it lay rumour. In that rumour, profit grew like moss in rain. You step into Egypt, where cinnamon and cassia mingle with resins and oils in sacred and funerary settings. The smell of embalming rooms is thick and solemn, a blend of natron, linen, cedar, myrrh, and imported aromatics. In temples, sweet smoke rises toward painted ceilings and carved gods. Cinnamon's value here is not only culinary, it belongs to transformation. It makes ordinary air feel touched by invisible power. In ritual, scent becomes a bridge. It moves where hands cannot. In a palace kitchen far away, a cook drops a fragment of bark into wine with honey. The liquid warms slowly. Steam rises, sweet and woody. A cup passes to your hands, smooth and warm against your palms. You taste it carefully. The spice softens the edge of the drink, then leaves a lingering heat at the back of the throat. It is not sugar. It is not fire. It is something between a memory and a promise. No wonder people wanted it. No wonder they paid too much. Cinnamon also enters medicine. In ancient and medieval healing traditions, it might be considered warming, drying, strengthening to the stomach, useful in mixtures for breath, digestion, or circulation. Whether every prescription helped is another matter. Some probably did soothe. Some mostly proved that the patient could afford imported bark. The line between treatment and status symbol can be rather thin, especially when the medicine smells expensive. Historians remain uncertain about many early references to cinnamon, because old names do not always match modern species. A word in a Greek, Hebrew, Egyptian, Sanskrit, or Chinese text may point to true cinnamon, cassia, a related bark, or even a category of fragrant woods. Scholars compare descriptions, trade routes, linguistic clues, and botanical possibilities, but certainty can fray like old rope. The spice itself may be clear in the hand, yet cloudy in the archive. You return to the island groves where the bark is still being peeled. The work is quiet, almost meditative. A worker's fingers are stained with plant oils. The bark feels cool when first lifted, then dries into curling warmth. Bundles are sorted by thickness and quality. Some pieces are pale and fine, others are darker, rougher, stronger. Outside, rain begins again, not violently, but with a soft persistence that makes the whole forest smell awake. The local world of cinnamon is practical. It is labour, land, knowledge, season, knife, drying mat, and careful storage. The distant world of cinnamon is imagination. It is bird nests, hidden islands, sacred smoke, royal banquets, medical confidence, and merchants with very selective memories. Between those two worlds, the bark travels. You watch bundles loaded onto a boat. They look fragile, almost weightless. Yet they carry enormous value because they carry distance. Every mile adds mystery. Every retelling adds danger. Every hand that touches the bundle adds cost. By the time the bark reaches a cold northern table, it no longer feels like peeled tree skin. It feels like a fragment of a fragrant planet. The evening settles over the shore. The cinnamon quills rest in baskets, curled like tiny scrolls no one can read except by scent. You lift one close to your face. The smell is gentle, sweet, wooded, and strangely calm. It has crossed forests, seas, languages, and lies. It has hidden behind myths and passed through careful hands. And still, at its heart, it is only bark, quietly giving warmth to the darkening air. You step away from the green coasts and into a world of ochre dust, blue shadows, and long roads drawn across the desert by hooves. The air is dry enough to make your lips tighten. Sand slips softly under your feet. Somewhere ahead, bells clink on a camel's harness, each note small and bright in the wide silence. A caravan moves like a slow thought across the horizon, carrying sacks, jars, cloth bundles, and secrets wrapped more carefully than gold. The desert does not seem like the natural home of spices. Nothing here looks lush. Thorn bushes cling to stone. Heat shivers over the ground. Yet Arabia becomes one of the great corridors of fragrance, a place where cinnamon, pepper, cassia, frankincense, myrrh, cardamom, and other aromatics pass from sea routes into inland markets and onward to hungry cities. The spice does not need to grow here to make this land powerful. It only needs to cross it. You walk beside the caravan in the cool of early morning. Camel pads press into sand with a soft, padded thump. Leather creaks. A driver murmurs to an animal that appears deeply unimpressed by all human ambition. The smell is a blend of dust, sweat, wool, dried dates, animal hide, and faint spice escaping from tied bundles. When the wind shifts, you catch pepper's bite, myrrh's bitter sweetness, and the clean, church-like smoke of frankincense resin. Though church is not the point yet. The scent is older than many of the buildings that will later claim it. A mainstream historical fact rests along these routes. Arab and South Arabian traders played a major role in moving spices and aromatics between the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, East Africa, and the Mediterranean world. Ports and caravan towns served as meeting places where goods from India, Arabia, Africa, and beyond could be sorted, taxed, repacked, and sold. Knowledge of winds, wells, tribal agreements, safe passages, and market customs was as valuable as the cargo itself. You enter a desert market near a walled town. Shade cloths ripple overhead. The ground is packed hard by countless feet. Traders sit behind goods arranged with quiet theatre incense tears like amber pebbles, sacks of pepper, bundles of bark, dried herbs, dates, salt, textiles, beads, and metalwork. The air is crowded with smell. Smoke rises from a brazier where resin melts and releases a slow, silver thread. It curls into the nose, bitter, piney, sacred, medicinal, expensive. You do not need a price tag. Your body understands that this smoke has travelled. A merchant invites you closer with a smile polished smooth by practice. He lifts a small amount of spice and lets it fall through his fingers. He does not hurry. Good selling is a kind of performance, and he knows the pause is worth money. He explains the cargo's origin with just enough detail to sound truthful, and just enough mystery to protect his suppliers. Ask too directly where the cinnamon came from, and you may receive a story involving cliffs, birds, storms, or a cousin who knows a cousin. The spice trade did not invent evasive answers, but it certainly seasoned them well. Here, middlemen are not useless figures standing between producer and buyer. That would be too simple, and history enjoys being inconvenient. These traders manage risk. They arrange credit, guide caravans, negotiate protection, know which wells are sweet and which tribes must be honoured with gifts. They understand seasons and ships. They know which ruler has raised taxes and which road has become unsafe. A spice bundle crossing the desert is not just carried, it is protected by memory, relationship, and 1,000 small judgments. You pause at a well where the caravan rests in the afternoon heat. The stone rim is warm beneath your hand. Water comes up slowly in a leather bucket, smelling faintly of minerals and rope. Camels kneel with folding, grumbling elegance. Men loosen straps and inspect loads. A pepper sack has torn slightly, and a few dark grains spill into the dust. Someone gathers them quickly. Even the ground does not get pepper for free. A quirky tidbit rises here with the incense smoke ancient writers sometimes believed Arabia itself produced many of the exotic spices that merely passed through Arabian hands. This confusion was convenient for merchants. if outsiders thought Arabia was the mysterious source of everything fragrant. Then the actual routes beyond Arabia remained hidden. It is a fine business model: sell the spice, sell the story, and keep the map to yourself. Honestly, modern branding people would applaud politely, then ask for a consulting fee. In South Arabia, incense kingdoms grew wealthy from frankincense and myrrh, resins harvested from trees that survive in harsh landscapes. Workers score the bark, and resin beads form like tears. The smell is not sweet in the simple way of fruit or flowers. It is austere, bitter, clean, and haunting. Burned in temples, homes, and ceremonies, incense changes the feeling of a room. It softens odours, marks sacred time, and turns ordinary breath into participation. You smell it and instinctively lower your voice. Spices and incense meet in these trade networks because both are light, valuable, and transformative. A small amount can alter food, air, medicine, worship, and status. In a palace, incense may signal divine favour. In a kitchen, pepper may signal wealth or good taste. In a sick room, aromatic mixtures may promise balance and relief. In a market, all of them signal profit, which has its own powerful fragrance, though less poetic. The scholarly uncertainty here is as dry and shifting as the sand. Historians debate how much control Arabian traders truly had over every stage of the spice trade at different times. Because routes changed, powers rose and fell, and surviving sources often come from outsiders who misunderstood what they saw. Some ports were deeply connected to Indian Ocean commerce. Some caravan routes mattered more in certain centuries than others. The image of a single, unbroken Arabian monopoly is too neat. Real trade was tangled, flexible, and constantly negotiated. As evening cools the desert, the caravan moves again. The sky turns violet, then deep blue. Stars appear with startling clarity, scattered so thickly they seem like powdered salt spilled across black cloth. The bells resume their soft rhythm. The smell of warm animals and leather mingles with resin and pepper. You feel the night air on your skin, cooler now, almost kind. At a campfire, traders eat bread, dates, perhaps a stew sharpened with a precious pinch of spice. Someone tells a story, someone laughs quietly, someone checks the cargo again before sleep. The desert around you is enormous, but the circle of fire is intimate. A spice route is not only a line on a map, it is made of nights like this, of tired bodies, guarded bundles, shared water, uncertain roads, and the patient courage of people who carry fragrance through emptiness. The caravan fades into darkness, but the scent remains: smoke, dust, pepper, resin, and distant seas waiting beyond the dunes. You enter the Mediterranean through the smell of olive oil, sea salt, warm stone, and wine darkening in clay jars. The light is bright here. Even when it softens toward evening, it slides across whitewashed walls, bronze cups, market awnings, and the quiet faces of statues who have seen far too many dinner parties. Somewhere, a goat bleats with the confidence of a philosopher. Somewhere else, a cook crushes herbs and imported pepper into a paste, and the air turns sharper. In the Greek world, spices and aromatics arrive as both pleasure and puzzle. They come from places that feel half-known, carried by traders, sailors, and stories. Pepper, cinnamon, cassia, ginger, cardamom, frankincense, myrrh, saffron, and many local herbs enter conversations about medicine, diet, worship, luxury, and the proper way to behave at a table without looking like a barbarian with excellent seasoning. You walk through an Athenian market in the classical period. Though not every spice is equally available or common, the ground is dusty under your sandals. Fishmongers shout, olive sellers gesture over jars, bread smells warm and yeasty. Fresh herbs lie in small bundles: thyme, oregano, mint, fennel, bay. These local flavours are familiar, practical, and deeply loved. Imported spices, by contrast, carry glamour. Their value comes from distance, rarity, and the pleasant human weakness for anything that suggests one has connections. A mainstream historical fact sits comfortably among the jars and scales Greek physicians, especially those associated with the Hippocratic tradition, treated food and medicine as deeply connected. Ingredients were often described according to qualities such as hot, cold, dry, or moist, and spices could be valued for the way they were believed to affect the body. Pepper might warm, aromatic resins might cleanse, herbs might aid digestion. The boundary between kitchen and clinic was wonderfully porous. A dinner could be therapy, and therapy could taste suspiciously like soup. You follow a physician into a small room lined with baskets, jars, and bundles of dried plants. The air is bitter, dusty, floral, and sharp. He rubs a leaf between his fingers and smells it. He weighs a resin, scrapes a root, mixes a powder with honey or wine. The patient sits nearby, wrapped in wool, hoping the cure will not be worse than the illness. Ancient medicine is thoughtful, observant, and sometimes very strange. There is wisdom here, but also the occasional prescription that makes you admire the patient's courage. Saffron glows in this world like captured sunlight. You see its fine red threads, delicate and expensive, gathered from crocus flowers. It colours food, perfumes rooms, stains cloth, enters medicine, and appears in ritual and art. The smell is hay-like, honeyed, faintly metallic. A pinch is small enough to vanish in the palm, yet it can transform a dish or dye water gold. Saffron reminds you that not all spice stories begin in distant tropical forests. Some grow in Mediterranean fields, demanding intense labour and patient fingers. A quirky tidbit appears in the banqueting room, where Greeks recline at symposia, drink wine mixed with water, talk, flirt, argue, sing, and occasionally behave with the dignified restraint of people who have definitely had enough wine. Perfumed oils might be used on the body, garlands of herbs and flowers might be worn, aromatics could help create the atmosphere of refinement. Imagine someone insisting that their garland improves intellectual discussion. It probably does not, but it smells better than overconfidence. You enter a dining room at dusk. Lamps flicker. Cushions are arranged along low couches. The table holds bread, olives, cheese, fish, lentils, figs, perhaps meat for those who can afford it, and sauces sharpened with vinegar, herbs, and imported spices when available. A servant pours wine. A guest comments on the flavour with a seriousness usually reserved for politics. The Greeks loved moderation in theory and variety in practice, which is a very human arrangement. Then Rome rises, loud, hungry, practical, ambitious. You move into a city of stone streets, crowded apartments, public baths, temples, shops, and kitchens. The sound is constant wheels on paving stones, voices in alleys, water splashing in fountains, hammers ringing, dogs barking, merchants bargaining as if the fate of the Republic depends on a fish. The smell is intense baking bread, smoke, sweat, wine, oil, sewage, flowers, incense, and sauces simmering behind doorways. Roman appetite gives spices a grand stage. The empire stretches across climates and cultures, and its trade networks pull goods inward. Pepper becomes especially beloved, so does cumin, coriander, mustard, dill, fennel, celery seed, rue, mint, and imported ginger, cinnamon, cassia, and other aromatics. Roman cooks layer flavours with herbs, vinegar, honey, wine, fermented fish sauce, oil, nuts, dried fruits, and spice. The result can be bold, sweet, sour, salty, and fragrant all at once. You stand in a Roman kitchen where heat presses close. The floor is rough underfoot. A mortar sits on a work surface, heavy and cool to the touch. Into it go peppercorns, cumin, coriander, lovage perhaps, and a splash of garum, that famous fermented fish sauce whose smell announces itself with no hesitation at all. The cook grinds the mixture into a paste. It is strong, savoury, and alive. Modern noses may hesitate, but Roman diners might lean in happily. Taste is history wearing a different tongue. A mainstream fact of Roman food culture is that elite cookery, reflected in texts associated with Epicurus, used spices and complex sauces to create rich, layered dishes. This was not the daily reality for every person in the empire. Many ordinary Romans ate grain, bread, legumes, olives, cheese, vegetables, and simple stews. But even modest kitchens used local herbs and seasonings when they could. Flavour was not only for emperors. Luxury was unequal, yes, but appetite was universal. A quirky Roman tidbit waits at the banquet. Some wealthy hosts loved dishes that disguised ingredients or surprised guests, turning dinner into edible theatre. Birds served inside other animals, sauces that made one food taste like another, elaborate presentations that required more staff than common sense. Spices helped with this performance. They added mystery. They made the familiar seem foreign. They allowed a host to say, without saying it, "Please notice how expensive my seasoning is." Still, not everyone approved. Moralists complained about luxury, foreign tastes, and the softening effects of extravagant dining. The criticism has a familiar tone. Every age has someone convinced that society was better before people discovered fancy sauces. Roman writers could frame imported spices as signs of decadence, as if pepper itself were personally responsible for moral decline. Poor pepper. It only wanted to improve lentils. Historians still argue whether elite complaints about spice and luxury reflect genuine widespread concern, literary exaggeration, political performance, or old-fashioned grumbling polished into prose. Sources from wealthy male writers do not always reveal how ordinary people felt. A senator condemning exotic food may still have enjoyed a well-seasoned dinner privately. Human hypocrisy is one of the most reliable preservatives in the historical record. You leave the banquet and walk toward a small street stall. A pot steams in the cool night air. The smell is humble and inviting: beans, onions, herbs, oil, perhaps a little pepper if the vendor has it. Someone buys a bowl and eats standing in the street, hands wrapped around the warmth. This is where spice becomes most human. Not as a symbol, not as a moral problem, not as a line in a medical theory. Just taste, comfort, heat, and the little pleasure of a mouthful that wakes the body. The Mediterranean night settles around you. Incense drifts from a shrine. Wine cups are rinsed. A physician closes his jars. A cook wipes the mortar clean. Across Greek and Roman worlds, spices have become tools for thinking about health, wealth, pleasure, restraint, identity, and desire. They do not merely season food, they season debate. You breathe in olive smoke, pepper, saffron, vinegar, sea wind, and warm stone. The ancient tables glow softly behind you, noisy for a moment, then quiet. You enter Rome not through marble arches, but through a warehouse door near the river, where the real empire breathes in sacks, jars, ropes, and ledgers. The air is thick with grain dust, damp timber, olive oil, wine lees, sweat, and pepper. Always pepper. It hides in the corners of the smell, dark and dry, waiting to sting the nose when a sack is opened. Outside, the Tiber moves slowly past quays crowded with barges, porters, officials, and merchants who all seem convinced that the gods personally invented commerce to test their patience. Rome is hungry in a way that feels almost geological. It consumes wheat from North Africa and Egypt, wine from Gaul and Italy, oil from Spain, fish sauce from coastal factories, metals, timber, silk, gems, animals, slaves, and spices. The city draws the world inward, not gently but steadily, like a tide with paperwork. In this vast appetite, spices become part of the everyday machinery of empire. They are not the largest cargo by weight, but they are among the most magical by value. A small package can carry the worth of many bulky goods, and it smells better than tax records, which is a low standard, but still. You walk among amphorae stacked in rows, clay scrapes clay, a porter's shoulder is red where the load has rubbed the skin. Officials inspect seals and tally goods. Pepper arrives in sacks from the Indian Ocean routes, often through Red Sea ports, then up into Egypt and across to the Mediterranean. Ships bring cargo to harbours such as Alexandria, then onward toward Rome. The journey is long and expensive, but the demand is strong enough to keep it moving. A mainstream historical fact stands solidly in this busy scene. Roman trade with India expanded greatly during the early empire, helped by knowledge of monsoon winds that allowed ships to sail more directly across the Arabian Sea. Pepper became a major import, mentioned in texts, found in archaeological contexts, and present in elite recipes. It was familiar enough to become a symbol of luxury, but common enough that Romans could joke, complain, cook, and trade with it in practical ways. You find yourself in a shop where spices sit in small containers behind a counter. The merchant is careful, his hands are clean, his eyes are not trusting. He lifts a scoop of pepper and lets the grains fall back with a papery rattle. Nearby are cumin, coriander, dill seed, anise, mustard, fennel, saffron, ginger, cassia, and perhaps long pepper, a spice with a deeper muskier heat than black pepper. The shop smells like a storm inside a cupboard. Sharp, sweet, bitter, dusty, floral, and warm. A customer enters, wearing a tunic dusty from the street. He asks for a small amount of pepper, not enough to impress a senator, just enough to make a household stew feel brighter. The merchant weighs it with a careful pinch. No grand speech, no epic music, just a purchase. This is how empire enters the mouth in tiny measures, wrapped in cloth, carried home through noisy streets. The Roman kitchen can be a smoky little world. You step inside one in an apartment block, an insula, where space is tight and the walls hold the day's heat. A pot simmers over a brazier. Lentils soften with leeks. Oil shines on the surface. A woman crushes pepper with cumin and coriander in a mortar. The stone feels cool under her hand, then warms with use. The grinding sound is slow and gritty. She adds the mixture to the pot, and the steam changes at once. The smell lifts from plain nourishment into something rounder and more awake. In wealthier houses, the use of spices can become theatrical. You recline in a dining room where painted walls glow by lamplight. The couch cushions are soft beneath your elbow. Servants move quietly with dishes dressed in sauces. Roman elite cooking often loves contrast sweet with salty, sour with rich, fragrant with fermented, delicate with startling, garum, wine, honey, vinegar, herbs, nuts, fruit, and spices all appear in combinations that modern diners might find surprising, though perhaps not as surprising as the host's confidence. A quirky tidbit belongs to the Roman table recipes connected with Apicius sometimes call for pepper. In places modern cooks might not expect, including sweets, drinks, and vegetable dishes. Pepper was not trapped in the role of meat seasoning. It wandered cheerfully through the meal, poking its tiny spicy nose into almost everything. A pear dish with pepper. Why not? Wine with aromatics. Naturally, Roman cuisine did not ask permission from your breakfast habits. Beyond kitchens, spices enter medicine. You step into a physician's storeroom where jars line the shelves. The air is bitter and clean, with honey, wine, dried roots, and sharp seeds mingling together. Pepper might be used in preparations meant to warm the body, stimulate digestion, or balance internal qualities according to medical theories of the time. Ginger, cinnamon, cassia, and other aromatics also appear in remedies. Whether the treatment was scientifically effective in every case is not the point Romans would have made. They saw flavour, heat, scent, and bodily effect as connected. Spices also appear in ritual and social display. Incense burns in temples. Perfumed oils mark the skin. Fragrant ingredients honour gods and guests alike. Scent is public language. It says devotion, refinement, wealth, cleanliness, and sometimes, very clearly, I've spent a lot of money to make the air around me superior. The Roman nose was trained to read status, yet uncertainty clings to the trade routes. Scholars still argue about the exact scale of Rome's spice imports and how widely spices reached ordinary households across different regions of the empire. Literary sources often focus on elites. Archaeology gives fragments peppercorns found in certain sites, amphorae, trade goods, harbour remains, written price lists, recipes, and medical texts. The evidence suggests broad movement, but not equal access. Rome was connected, but connection did not mean everyone sprinkled imported pepper as if they owned a villa. You move from the city toward the Red Sea world, where ships wait in hot harbours. The sun is fierce, The wood of the dock burns under the palm. Sailcloth snaps. Water jars are filled. Cargo is packed with care. Sailors prepare for routes shaped by monsoon winds, risk and timing. These sea smells of salt, tar, fish, and fear kept politely quiet. A captain studies the season. Leave too late, and wind becomes enemy. Leave too early, and the journey becomes guesswork. Spice profit depends on weather, and weather has never cared about shareholders. When ships return, they bring not only pepper but also stories. Ports become places where the Roman world hears rumours of India, Arabia, East Africa, and islands farther still. Some stories are accurate, some are embroidered, some are probably invented by sailors who wanted free drinks. Goods travel with imagination attached. A peppercorn can become a geography lesson, a medical ingredient, a luxury symbol, a joke, and dinner, all before it is swallowed. Back in Rome, night settles over the streets. A bakery's oven glows. A shrine releases a thread of incense. Somewhere, an elite banquet drifts toward drowsy excess. Somewhere else, a simple pot of beans has been made less lonely by a few crushed grains of pepper. The empire is vast, unequal, and restless, but flavour slips through its levels with surprising ease. You hold a peppercorn between finger and thumb. It is small, dry, and almost weightless. Still inside it lives a chain of farmers, sailors, porters, merchants, cooks, physicians, priests, and diners. Rome does not merely conquer lands, it gathers tastes, and in gathering them, it teaches distant plants to speak Latin at the table. You walk into a world where Rome has loosened its grip. Not all at once, not like a dropped cup, but slowly, unevenly, with cracks spreading through roads, towns, armies, taxes, and memory. The air feels cooler. Stone buildings stand with weeds in their joints. Old milestones lean beside muddy tracks. In some places, markets continue as if nothing essential has changed. In others, roofs sag, coins grow scarce, and people speak of safer roads in the same wistful tone usually reserved for youth and good teeth. Yet flavour does not vanish when governments stumble. Spices continue moving, sometimes in smaller amounts, sometimes by altered routes, sometimes through hands that leave fewer records. A jar of pepper in a storeroom, a pouch of cumin in a healer's bag, a pinch of coriander in a stew, incense burned before an altar. These small continuities matter. History often loves kings and battles, but kitchens are more patient. They survive on habit, hunger, and the quiet refusal to eat bland porridge forever. You enter a monastery in the early medieval countryside. The stone floor is cold beneath your feet. Candle smoke darkens the ceiling. Outside, wind brushes bare branches against the wall with a dry scratching sound. Inside, the air holds beeswax, wool, damp parchment, stale bread, herbs drying from rafters, and a faint medicinal bitterness. Monks copy text by hand, preserving fragments of Greek and Roman knowledge, including medical writings that mention herbs, aromatics, diet, and digestion. The scratch of the quill is soft and steady, almost like an insect moving across the page. A mainstream historical fact rests here among the manuscripts monasteries became important centres for preserving and transmitting medical, agricultural, and culinary knowledge in parts of medieval Europe. Their gardens grew useful plants such as sage, fennel, mint, rue, parsley, dill, and medicinal herbs. Imported spices remained available to some communities through trade, though access varied greatly by region, wealth, and century. The world was not cut off, it was rearranged. You step into the monastery garden at dawn. Frost silvering the leaves melts under weak sunlight. The soil is dark and cold. A monk bends to inspect rosemary, thyme, and fennel, his fingers rough from work. These local herbs do not carry the prestige of pepper or cinnamon, but they are beloved because they are close, dependable, and alive under the hand. Their scent rises when touched. Rosemary is resinous and sharp. Mint is cool and green. Fennel is sweet, almost licorice-like. The garden is a small library written in leaves. Inside the infirmary, a brother warms wine with herbs for someone coughing beneath a blanket. Honey thickens the mixture. Perhaps a little imported spice is added if stores allow it, not casually, but with intention. The patient drinks and winces. Comfort, as always, does not guarantee deliciousness. The room smells of fever, straw bedding, wax, and crushed plants. A bowl is warm against your palms. Rain taps lightly at the shutters. Beyond monastery walls, trade continues through towns, fairs, river routes, and coastal networks. You walk through a market in a former Roman town now smaller than its old walls. Merchants spread cloth on tables. A woman sells onions and leeks. A man has salt, dried fish, and coarse pottery. Another keeps tiny packets of imported goods under watchful eyes. Pepper may appear in such places as a luxury, medicine, gift, or ingredient for a feast. It is no longer the casual flood of imperial appetite, yet it remains desirable. A quirky tidbit survives in the habits of early medieval medicine and belief. Some texts and folk practices treated strong smells as protective, able to drive away corruption, illness, or evil influences. Aromatic herbs might be hung, burned, carried, or mixed into salves. Whether a bundle of sage could frighten a demon is open to debate, but it could certainly improve the smell of a damp room full of unwashed people and anxious livestock. Sometimes practical benefits wear magical clothing because nobody has yet invented ventilation standards. In the Byzantine world, continuity is more visible. You stand in Constantinople, where domes rise over the Bosporus and ships crowd the harbours. The air smells of seawater, incense, fish, olive oil, hot bread, silk, and spice. Here, Roman traditions continue in Greek speech, Christian ritual, imperial ceremony, and trade connections reaching toward the eastern Mediterranean, Black Sea, Red Sea, and beyond. Markets offer pepper, cinnamon, cloves in later centuries, saffron and medicinal aromatics when supply allows. The city gleams with mosaics and bureaucracy, both requiring patience. You enter a church where incense curls upward in blue threads. The floor is cool marble. Voices chant in low waves, echoing under the dome. Fragrance fills the space and changes time. It makes the air seem thicker, slower, more deliberate. Incense in Christian worship becomes a powerful inheritance from older ritual worlds, yet it takes on new meanings: prayer rising, sanctity, purification, reverence. The smell settles into robes, hair, and memory. Spices also move through Jewish, Syriac, Persian, Armenian, and many other communities across late antique and early medieval worlds. You sit in a household where food is prepared for a festival meal. Garlic is crushed. Cumin warms in a pan. Coriander seeds are bruised. The air grows nutty and bright. A child reaches toward the bowl and is gently stopped, because children have always believed food becomes ready at the exact moment it smells good. Family recipes carry migration better than monuments do. Still, historians differ over how sharply spice access declined in Western Europe after Roman political power fragmented. Some argue that long-distance luxury trade reduced significantly in many regions. Others point to continuing Mediterranean exchange, elite consumption, church demand, and archaeological finds showing that rare goods did not disappear. The truth is uneven, like a road repaired in patches. Some places lost access, some adapted, some remained connected through merchants who knew how to profit from uncertainty. You walk along one of those roads as evening gathers. It is muddy, rutted, and edged with wet grass. A pack animal carries small bundles wrapped in leather. The trader beside it is tired, guarded, and practical. His goods are not enough to fill an imperial warehouse, but they matter. A packet of pepper for a noble household, resin for a church, dried herbs for a healer, saffron threads for dye, medicine, or a feast. Small cargo, large meaning. At a manor kitchen, preparations begin for a winter meal. Smoke hangs low beneath beams blackened by years of fire. The cook's hands are red from cold water and work. A pot of meat and grain simmers slowly. Local herbs go in first, then, carefully. A few precious imported grains are crushed and added. The smell changes, subtle but unmistakable. People notice. They may not know every coastline crossed by the spice, but they know this meal is special. The night deepens. Outside, frost forms on wooden rails. Inside, bowls are filled, benches creak, and steam rises into firelight. The world has shifted from imperial roads to regional powers, from grand warehouses to smaller circuits, from confident maps to guarded paths. But spice remains. It survives because it has too many uses to disappear taste. Medicine, ritual, prestige, comfort, memory. You breathe in smoke, bread, herbs, wax, damp wool, and a careful hint of pepper. Empires can fall silent, but flavour keeps speaking in low tones. You enter Baghdad beneath a sky the colour of warm milk, where the Tigris moves in slow green-brown curves and the city hums like a great instrument being tuned. The streets are crowded, but not frantic in the same way as old imperial ports. This place has its own rhythm, water sellers calling, horses snorting, copper pans ringing, scholars debating under shaded arches, cooks waving smoke away from their eyes, and merchants arranging spices as if composing a quiet poem. The air is rich with scent. Sesame oil warms in pans. Lamb sizzles over coals. Rosewater drifts from a perfumer's stall. Cardamom, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, musk, camphor, cloves, ginger, and sugar appear in markets that gather the taste of many regions. You feel the shade of a cloth awning on your face. Beneath it, bowls of spices glow softly red, gold, brown, black, pale green, and dusty orange. Each colour seems to hold a different climate. This is a world where trade, scholarship, medicine, cooking, poetry, and religion meet with unusual elegance. Across the Islamic Golden Age, cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, and Cordoba become centres of learning and exchange. Goods move through the Indian Ocean, Central Asia, the Mediterranean, the Sahara, and river systems. Knowledge moves with them, recipes travel, medical ideas travel, words travel. The spice jar becomes, in its own small way, a library. A mainstream historical fact belongs here, scholars writing in Arabic preserved, translated, expanded, and critiqued medical and scientific knowledge from Greek, Persian, Indian, and other traditions. Physicians and pharmacists studied materia medica, including spices and aromatics, with great seriousness. Ingredients were classified, described, combined, and tested through inherited theory and practical observation. The result was not simply superstition wearing perfume. It was a sophisticated intellectual world, even when some conclusions now feel charmingly optimistic. You step into a pharmacy, or say Delani's shop, where shelves hold jars, boxes, folded papers, and glass vessels. The room smells astonishing bitter roots, honey, vinegar, dried roses, frankincense, myrrh, pepper, camphor, musk, ambergris, cinnamon, and medicinal syrups. The pharmacist's fingers are stained from powders and oils. He weighs ingredients on delicate scales, his hands moving with quiet precision. A patient describes a stomach complaint. The pharmacist listens, nods, and begins to mix a preparation with ginger, perhaps cinnamon, perhaps fennel, perhaps something sweet to make the whole thing less hostile to the human spirit. Spices in this world are not merely flavour. They are heat, moisture, dryness, stimulation, comfort, preservation, beauty, and balance. They can warm the stomach, sweeten breath, perfume clothing, soothe a throat, colour rice, strengthen a syrup, or dignify a guest. A good household understands that scent is hospitality. A good physician understands that taste can carry medicine into the body. A good cook understands that the tongue enjoys complexity, because even in a serious civilization, dinner deserves a little drama. You enter a kitchen where rice steams under a cloth cover. The room is hot and fragrant. A cook grinds saffron with a little liquid until the colour blooms like sunset. Cinnamon and pepper wait nearby. Almonds are pounded. Dried fruits are chopped. Meat is cooked with spices, sweetness, acidity, and fat in careful balance. The sound of a ladle against a pot is slow and reassuring. Steam touches your cheek. The smell is comforting but refined, as if the dish has dressed for court without becoming annoying about it. In Abbasid cuisine, you find layered flavours that later echo through many food traditions. Sweet and savoury can share a dish without embarrassment. Rosewater and orange blossom can perfume desserts and drinks. Vinegar can sharpen richness. Herbs brighten heavy meats. Saffron gives rice and sauces a colour that feels luxurious even before the first bite. Pepper brings warmth. Cinnamon adds sweetness without sugar's bluntness. Cardamom lifts the breath. Cumin gives earth. Coriander gives citrusy softness. Every spice has a personality, though some are more polite than others. A quirky tidbit glimmers in courtly food culture. Some elite medieval Arabic cookbooks describe dishes with names that sound like poetry, jokes, or private references. There are recipes associated with caliphs, singers, physicians, and elegant hosts. Food could be a performance of wit as well as wealth. A dish might announce taste, learning, status, and a tiny bit of yes. My kitchen staff has better education than your cousin. This is the gentle arrogance of refinement, sprinkled with saffron. You move from Baghdad to Cairo, where the Nile carries boats under a hot pale sky. Markets spill through streets near mosques and caravanserais. The smell of cumin and coriander rises from food stalls. Bakers slap dough against oven walls. Sugar appears in sweets. Tamarind drinks cool the throat. Spice merchants receive goods from the Red Sea, North Africa, Syria, Yemen, India, and farther east. Cairo becomes a hinge between worlds, and its food breathes that geography. In Cordoba, farther west, gardens shine with irrigation channels, citrus trees, curbs, and shaded courtyards. The air smells of orange blossoms, wet stone, mint, and cooking oil. Andalusi cooks and gardeners bring new plants, techniques, and tastes into Iberian life. Saffron, cinnamon, pepper, coriander, cumin, and aromatic waters enrich tables and medicines. You sit in a courtyard where water murmurs through a narrow channel, cooling the air. A bowl of spice stew arrives, and the scent mingles with jasmine climbing the wall. Still, uncertainty remains, because the history of taste is a difficult thing to catch. Specialists debate how closely surviving elite cookbooks represent ordinary meals in Islamic societies. Manuscripts often preserve courtly or urban recipes, not every village pot. Archaeological evidence, agricultural texts, medical works, poetry, legal records, and later culinary traditions all help. But the daily food of the poor can remain faint. The rich wrote more, or had more written about them, which is very convenient for the rich and deeply annoying for historians. You sit beside a scholar in a library where the smell of ink, leather, paper, and dust replaces the kitchen steam. He copies passages about plants, noting where they grow, how they taste, what they do, and how they should be combined. Outside, a spice seller calls to passers-by. The scholar pauses, listening, perhaps smiling. The world of books and the world of markets are not separate. The text names the spice. The merchant sells it. The cook transforms it. The physician prescribes it. The guest remembers it. Night settles over Baghdad. Lamps burn with a soft yellow glow. From a nearby house comes the scent of cinnamon rice, roasted meat, vinegar, herbs, and smoke. Somewhere, a poet compares a beloved's breath to musk or clove, because apparently even romance needs a pantry. Somewhere else, a pharmacist closes his jars and covers his scales. The city quiets, but it does not lose its fragrance. You breathe in the warm air and understand how spices have become part of a larger art of living. They belong to science, pleasure, devotion, status, healing, trade, and memory. In these cities, flavour is not a simple decoration. It is knowledge made edible, medicine made fragrant, and distance made intimate. The Tigris moves through the darkness, carrying reflections of lamps like little floating saffron threads. You enter medieval Europe through a doorway of cold stone, wood smoke, damp wool, and hunger made patient by habit. The wind moves around castle walls and monastery roofs with a low, tired voice. Rain gathers in the ruts of village lanes. Chickens scratch beneath carts. Somewhere, a church bell sounds across fields, slow and solemn, calling people through a day measured by labour, prayer, weather, and the question of what can be stretched into supper. Here, spices glow in the imagination because ordinary life is often plain. Bread is dark and dense. Pottage simmers with peas, beans, leeks, onions, cabbages, barley, or oats. Ale is safer than questionable water in many places, though not always as cheerful as tavern songs suggest. Salt matters deeply. Herbs matter to parsley, sage, thyme, mint, fennel, dill, and rosemary brighten what the season allows. But imported spices are different. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, mace, nutmeg, saffron, grains of paradise, and galangal carry the shimmer of distance. You step into a noble kitchen before a feast. The room is hot, smoky, and loud. Firelight jumps across iron hooks and copper pots. The floor is strewn with rushes that crackle underfoot. Servants hurry with trays, knives, and bowls. A cook wipes sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist, then returns to a mortar where pepper, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves are being pounded into powder. The sound is dull and steady. Thump, scrape, thump. The smell rises in waves, warm and sweet, sharp and almost floral. A mainstream historical fact sits at this crowded table in medieval European elite cuisine. Spices were highly prized and widely used in sauces, meats, fish, sweets, wines, and medicinal preparations. They displayed wealth. But they were not used simply to hide rotten meat. Despite that popular myth wandering around like a confused goose, fresh meat was expensive, and anyone wealthy enough to afford large quantities of imported spice usually had access to decent food. Spoiled meat still tasted spoiled. Medieval noses were not broken, they just lived in a smellier world. You watch the making of a sauce. Breadcrumbs thicken it, vinegar sharpens it, wine softens it, almond milk adds richness, ginger brings heat, cinnamon brings sweetness, pepper gives bite, saffron turns it gold, a colour so luxurious it practically clears its throat and asks to be admired. The sauce is poured over roasted meat, or perhaps fish on a fasting day, because the medieval calendar has many rules about eating, and everyone becomes very creative when told they cannot have what they want. In this world, spice is tied to the body. Physicians still think in terms of qualities hot, cold, moist, dry. Foods must be balanced according to a person's temperament, season, age, and condition. A cold, moist fish may need a hot, dry sauce. A rich meal may need digestive spices. Wine may be warmed and scented. Sugar, still expensive in much of medieval Europe, joined spices in medicines and confections. You sit in a sick room where a spiced cordial is offered to a pale patient. It smells of cinnamon, cloves, wine, and hope. Hope, sadly, has never been an exact science, but it is a common ingredient. A quirky tidbit appears in the form of Hippocras, a sweet-spiced wine strained through a cloth bag often called a sleeve of Hippocrates. The name sounds grandly medical, as if a famous ancient physician personally approved your after-dinner drink. Whether he would have enjoyed it is unknowable, but medieval hosts did. Wine mixed with sugar or honey and spices could be served at the end of a meal, warming the throat and perfuming the breath. Nothing says refined digestion like getting lightly scented and slightly tipsy while claiming therapeutic intent. You pass from a castle into a merchant's home in a growing town. The atmosphere shifts. There is less pageantry, more calculation. The walls are timbered, the floor swept, the shelves orderly. A chest holds cloth, coins, documents, and small packets of spice. The merchant's wife measures ginger carefully for a holiday dish. Her fingers move with practiced restraint. A little goes a long way, especially when it costs enough to make generosity feel dangerous. The spice does not belong only to kings. Urban prosperity brings imported flavours into more households, though unevenly and in small amounts. At a fair, you hear the pulse of commerce. Bells on animals, shouting vendors, clattering wheels, laughter from taverns, sermons in the square, and the soft jingle of coins. Spice sellers guard their goods in boxes and bags. Pepper is familiar, but still valued. Saffron is prized for both colour and flavour. Grains of paradise, peppery and aromatic, become fashionable in certain regions. Galangal, related to ginger, lends its fragrant heat to recipes and medicines. The market smells of wool, mud, smoke, frying food, animals, and expensive little powders kept away from rain. Spices also belong to devotion. Incense rises in churches, sweet and solemn. The smoke blurs candlelight and softens the hard edges of stone. It clings to robes and hair, making sacred space something you can smell long after you leave. A wealthy donor may give spices, wax, or aromatics to a religious house. Such gifts serve God, memory, and social reputation all at once, which is efficient, if not entirely humble. Yet scholars continue to debate exactly how medieval Europeans understood and valued spices beyond simple luxury. Were they mainly status markers, medical tools, culinary necessities for elite taste, devotional substances, or imagined fragments of paradise? The answer changes by century, region, class, and context. A spice in a royal feast says one thing. A spice in a physician's jar says another. A spice in a church censer speaks in smoke rather than taste. You stand in a hall as the feast settles into slower sounds. Dogs sleep near the rushes. A lute murmurs. Cups are refilled. Outside, rain taps the shutters and the world is cold, muddy, and dark. Inside, a dish arrives scented with ginger, cinnamon, and saffron. The steam rises gently into torchlight. People lean forward. For a moment, distant heat enters the northern room. The spice has crossed seas, deserts, ports, warehouses, counting tables, and anxious hands. Yet here it becomes intimate, a warm taste on the tongue, a breath of sweetness in winter, a sign that life can be more than endurance. Medieval Europe dreams through spices, not only of wealth, but of elsewhere. You breathe in the golden sauce, the smoky rafters, the wet wool drying by the fire, and the faint church incense resting in the folds of evening. The night grows deeper, and flavour keeps the room awake. You glide into Venice by water, which is the only proper way to enter a city that appears to have made a private agreement with the sea. The lagoon is silver in the morning. Poles stand like dark fingers in the shallows. Boats move quietly past brick walls, arched windows, and steps green with tide marks. The air smells of salt, wet stone, tar, fish, candle wax, wool, and something warmer drifting from a warehouse door. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, and nutmeg, locked away in the dimness like fragrant prisoners with excellent resale value. Venice is not built for farmland, it is built for movement. It lives by ships, contracts, careful diplomacy, and the talent of turning geography into money. The city rises from mud banks and islands, yet it reaches into the eastern Mediterranean with a confidence that is almost rude. Venetian merchants learn the sea lanes, the ports, the rulers, the taxes, the bribes, the weights, the risks, the languages, and the fragile moods of profit. They do not grow the spices, but they become masters of touching them at the right moment. You step onto a quay near the Rialto, where commerce makes its own weather. Porters shout, ropes slap against mast, crates creak, bales of cloth arrive from one direction, metalwork from another, grain from somewhere else, and spices from the long eastern routes that pass through Alexandria, Constantinople, the Levant, and countless hands. A sack of pepper is carried past you on a bent back. It gives off a dry, sharp scent that cuts through the fishy damp of the canal. A mainstream historical fact rests in this bustle during the later Middle Ages. Venice became one of Europe's dominant spice-trading powers, especially through its connections with the eastern Mediterranean and Mamluk Egypt. Venetian ships and merchants helped bring pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, and other luxury goods into European markets. The city's wealth was tied not only to courage at sea, but to paperwork, credit, naval protection, and a truly heroic devotion to accounting. You enter a fondico, a merchant warehouse and lodging house where goods and people are watched with equal attention. The interior is cool after the glare outside. Stone floors hold a faint dampness. Wooden beams smell of age and salt. Spices are stored in barrels, chests, sacks, and bundles, protected from moisture and theft. Moisture ruins value. Theft ruins trust. Both are treated as enemies of civilization, though one suspects theft receives more dramatic punishment. A merchant opens a chest for inspection. Inside are small packages wrapped and sealed. The aroma rises slowly, complex and almost heavy. Cinnamon's sweetness, ginger's bite, cloves' dark warmth, pepper's rough spark, nutmeg's rounded perfume. The buyer lifts a sample and crushes it gently. Colour, scent, dryness, weight, and cleanliness are judged. Is the pepper fresh? Is the cinnamon thin enough? Are there stones hidden in the sack? Has someone bulked out the ginger with something less noble? Venetian commerce depends on trust. But it also assumes everyone might cheat if the candlelight is dim enough. At a counting table, you watch a clerk work with calm intensity. His fingers move over an abacus. Ink darkens a ledger page. Beside him sit contracts, bills of exchange, letters, seals, and notes about cargo shares. The room smells of parchment, dust, wool, and spice. Here, empire is not only captured with swords, it is measured in columns. Pepper becomes numbers, ginger becomes credit, cinnamon becomes a promise payable months from now, unless pirates, storms, war, disease, or a cousin with bad judgment interferes. The spice trade is glamorous until you meet the invoices. Venice's power grows from managing uncertainty. Ships are expensive. Voyages are dangerous. Cargo can vanish. So merchants spread risk through partnerships and investment shares. One man may fund part of a voyage. Another supplies goods. Another knows the route. Another has family in Alexandria. Another has the political connections required to make customs officials suddenly very friendly. Profit is built from networks, not lone heroes standing nobly on decks with wind in their hair. That image is nice, but someone still has to calculate insurance. A quirky tidbit belongs to the Venetian spice world officials sometimes inspected and regulated spices with remarkable seriousness. Because adulteration was common and reputation mattered. There are records from many medieval and early modern cities of rules against mixing inferior substances into valuable spices. A dishonest seller might stretch pepper with juniper berries, dust, husks, or other cheap additions. Imagine risking your reputation over fake pepper. It sounds silly until you remember that a small sack could be worth a painful amount of money. Fraud follows value like a gull follows a fishing boat. You move through the market streets where spices appear not only as cargo, but as desire. Apothecaries sell them for medicines. Confectioners use them in sweets. Wealthy households buy them for feasts. Churches need incense. Nobles want status. Physicians prescribe warmth, digestion, and balance. Cooks want complexity. A little cinnamon can make wine feel refined. A little clove can make a sauce feel deep. A little pepper can make vegetables stop apologizing. In a Venetian kitchen, fish from the lagoon is prepared with vinegar, raisins, onions, and spices. Steam fogs the window. The cook's hands smell of garlic and salt. A pinch of imported spice gives the dish a wider horizon. Outside, gondolas slide past black water. Inside, a family tastes the sea and the east in one mouthful. Venice is always local and global at the same time, which is convenient for dinner and confusing for identity. The city's politics are scented with spice as well. The Doge, councils, merchant families, and naval commanders understand that trade routes must be protected. Treaties matter. Fortified ports matter. Convoys matter. So does the ability to negotiate with Muslim powers while publicly performing Christian confidence. Venice is very skilled at moral flexibility with elegant architecture. It can pray, bargain, fight, and invoice, sometimes in the same week. Historians still argue over how to weigh Venice's spice trade against its other sources of wealth, such as textiles, banking, shipbuilding, grain, salt, and broader Mediterranean commerce. Spices were spectacular and profitable, but they were part of a larger system. It is tempting to imagine the city floating entirely on peppercorns, but that would be unstable, even by lagoon standards. The truth is, richer spices helped finance power, and power helped secure spices. At dusk, the lagoon darkens into blue glass. Bells ring across the water. Warehouses close their doors. Clerks sand fresh ink. Porters wash dust from their arms. In a noble house, a cup of spiced wine warms the hand. In a shop, a merchant locks away a small box of cloves. In a church, incense rises into candlelight, joining sacred smoke with commercial memory. You stand on a bridge and breathe the city in salt, tar, damp stone, fish, wax, pepper, cinnamon, and money. Venice does not taste the world innocently. It counts it, ships it, taxes it, stores it, and sells it with a steady hand. Yet beneath all the contracts and ambition, the spice remains what it has always been, a small fragment of plant that changes the air around it. The canal moves softly below, carrying reflections of lamps like scattered grains of gold. You enter a world of gates, tolls, fortresses, harbours, and guarded roads, where the scent of spices still travels west. But now it passes through hands that make European rulers increasingly nervous. The air is dry near the eastern Mediterranean, bright with sun on stone, sea salt rising from the water, and the warm smell of pack animals resting outside city walls. Merchants wait beneath awnings. Officials sit behind tables. Scales balance. Seals are checked. Coins change hands with that small metallic sound people pretend is businesslike, though it is really the sound of everyone wanting slightly more. The Ottoman rise does not suddenly slam shut the spice routes, no matter how tidy that story sounds when told too quickly. Trade continues, goods still move, caravans still cross land, ships still enter harbours, pepper still reaches kitchens, apothecaries, and banquet halls. But political power shifts, and with it comes new pressure. Control over territory means control over taxes, customs, roads, ports, and permissions. A spice is light, yes, but every border makes it heavier. You walk through Constantinople after its transformation into an Ottoman capital. The city smells of the Bosporus, baking bread, wool, horse sweat, coffee in later centuries, charcoal, and incense lingering from older sacred spaces. Domes and minarets shape the skyline. Markets are alive with silk, metalwork, fruit, ceramics, leather, carpets, and spices. The Ottoman world is not a blank wall between East and West. It is a powerful trading civilization in its own right, with tastes, laws, merchants, and kitchens that love fragrance deeply. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. The Ottoman Empire became a major power across the eastern Mediterranean, Balkans, Anatolia, and parts of the Middle East, influencing key routes through which Asian spices reached Europe. European merchants, especially Italians, still bought spices through eastern Mediterranean channels, but costs, rivalries, taxes, and political uncertainty encouraged some Western kingdoms to search for direct sea routes to Asia. The desire was not only flavour, it was profit without so many people taking a polite little bite along the way. You pass into a customs house where spice bales are opened for inspection. The room is shaded and dusty. A clerk records quantities in a ledger. Pepper sacks stand beside bundles of cinnamon-like bark, ginger, and perhaps cloves from farther east. The smell is wonderful, though the mood is not. Merchants dislike delays. Officials enjoy procedures. This ancient conflict could power a small empire by itself. A trader argues about a fee. The official listens with the calm face of a man who has heard every complaint and plans to ignore most of them. The spices move onward to Venetian, Genoese, Catalan, or other European merchants, who load them onto ships bound for Western markets. Each transaction adds cost. Each ruler, port, warehouse, and convoy demands payment. By the time the spices arrive in northern Europe, they carry the accumulated weight of geography and politics. A pinch of clove in a cup of wine has passed through a chain of ambition so long that the drink should probably come with a small diplomatic summary. Yet the Ottoman kitchens themselves are fragrant and sophisticated. You enter a palace kitchen complex where steam rises from great cauldrons, knives flash over herbs, and servants move in controlled rhythm. Rice, lamb, eggplants, yogurt, fruits, nuts, honey, vinegar, and spices are prepared for a vast household. Cinnamon may scent sweets and meat dishes. Pepper warms broths. Cloves perfume sherbets or stews. Saffron colours rice. The air is rich with smoke. Butter, onions, meat, sugar, and floral waters. Power here is edible, organised, and very well staffed. A quirky tidbit appears in the Ottoman love of sherbets. Fragrant drinks made with fruit, flowers, herbs, sugar, and sometimes spices, rose, violet, tamarind, lemon, quince, and other flavours might be cooled and served with ceremony. Imagine a court where diplomacy pauses for a jewel-coloured drink scented with clove or cinnamon. Much better than drinking lukewarm suspicion, though courts have served plenty of that too. Outside palace walls, street markets carry more everyday aromas. Flatbread bakes on hot surfaces, lamb turns over coals, cumin and sumac brighten food, mint cools yogurt, pickles sharpen the mouth. Coffee houses later add roasted bitterness to the air, mingling with cardamom in some traditions. The Ottoman world is not merely a gatekeeper of other people's spices, it is a creator of tastes, a blender of Turkic, Persian, Arab, Balkan, Mediterranean, and Central Asian influences. Still, European anxiety grows. You stand in Lisbon, Seville, and other western ports where sailors watch the Atlantic with uneasy ambition. The old eastern routes feel costly and crowded. Italian intermediaries seem too powerful. Muslim empires command lands that Christian monarchs would rather bypass than negotiate with forever. Maps are incomplete, but desire fills the blank spaces confidently, which is exactly how many terrible plans are born. Historians still debate how much the Ottoman expansion directly caused European oceanic exploration. It was certainly one factor, but not the only one. Atlantic states also sought gold, prestige, Christian alliances, fishing grounds, new trade opportunities, and royal glory. Technology in ships and navigation improved, knowledge from Arab, Mediterranean, and Atlantic traditions combined. The idea that Europe sailed west and south only because one route was blocked is too simple. History is rarely one locked door. It is usually a corridor full of expensive inconveniences. You board an Atlantic vessel preparing for exploration. The deck smells of pine, tar, salt, damp rope, stale water, and fear disguised as discipline. Barrels are lashed down, sailors mutter, officers speak of routes, winds, and God. Somewhere in the conversation, pepper appears like a prayer with a price attached. If a ship can reach the source directly, the profit might be enormous. No more layers of taxes, no more depending on rivals, no more buying at the end of a long chain. The dream is simple sail around the middlemen and return rich enough to make caution look foolish. Back in the eastern markets, life continues, traders still sell, cooks still season, officials still tax, pilgrims, scholars, artisans, soldiers, and sailors cross the same spaces, each carrying smells on their clothes, smoke, sweat, rose oil, leather, pepper, and the sea. The spice routes are not dead. They are alive, but contested. Their pulse is strong enough to make distant monarchs restless. You stand at a harbour as evening turns the water copper. A ship unloads cargo under watchful eyes. A muezzin's call drifts over rooftops. Bells answer from another quarter. The spice sacks sit on the quay. Ordinary in shape, extraordinary in consequence. Around them gather languages, taxes, prayers, bargains, suspicions, and dreams of bypassing everyone else. A gate does not need to close to change history. It only needs to become expensive. You step onto a Portuguese shore where the Atlantic rolls in with a deep, grey patience. The wind tastes of salt and kelp. Gulls wheel over the harbour, crying like unpaid creditors. Fishing boats creak against the quay, and beyond them, larger vessels wait with their sails furled, smelling of tar, oak, rope, damp wool, and human nerves. The sea is no longer only an edge, it is becoming a road, though one that seems extremely interested in drowning anyone who gets overconfident. Portugal looks small on a map, pressed against the western side of Iberia, but its gaze turns outward with unusual force. Kings, nobles, merchants, pilots, shipbuilders, and priests all bring their own hopes to the coast. Some want gold, some want Christian allies, some want glory, some want trade, some want pepper, which sounds less dramatic than glory until you calculate the profit. A route by sea to India could break dependence on older Mediterranean networks and place the spice trade directly in Portuguese hands. You walk through a harbour town at dawn. Men carry barrels of water and salted food toward a ship. Coopers hammer hoops around casks. Sailors mend canvas. Priests bless vessels with solemn words, while several crewmen probably wonder whether holiness improves hull strength. The air is cold, but the work is hot. A boy runs past with a coil of a rope over one shoulder. Somewhere, dried fish is being packed, and the smell is bold enough to deserve its own title. A mainstream historical fact anchors this scene in 1498. Vasco da Gama reached India by sailing around the southern tip of Africa and across the Indian Ocean, opening a direct sea route from Portugal to the spice markets of the Indian subcontinent. This voyage did not create Indian Ocean trade, which was already old, complex, and sophisticated. It inserted Portugal into an existing world, and Portugal arrived with cannons, royal backing, commercial hunger, and a personality that could not be described as shy. You board a caravel and feel the deck shift beneath your feet. The wood is rough under your palm, the hold smells of bilge water, salt meat, stale bread, oil, and packed supplies. Navigation depends on instruments, experience, charts, stars, currents, and the memory of earlier voyages down the African coast. The Portuguese have been learning the Atlantic step by step, building forts, trading along West Africa, rounding capes, naming places, and gathering knowledge from many sources, including African pilots, Arab geographers, Mediterranean sailors, and their own hard-won mistakes. The ship leaves harbour, and the coast slowly falls away. At first, the voyage feels almost graceful. Wind fills the sails, foam breaks along the hull, sunlight scatters over the water, then the days lengthen into sameness. Salt crusts on skin, clothes stiffen. Food becomes repetitive with a dedication that is almost spiritual. The sea slaps the planks at night. Men sleep in cramped spaces, breathing tar, sweat, and damp cloth. Pepper dreams are much easier on land. You travel south along Africa's western coast. The air changes. Heat grows heavier. New shores appear. Green, gold, rocky, or misted. Portuguese ships stop, bargain, fight, repair, take on water, and ask questions. Every harbour is a lesson. Every current is a warning. Every storm reminds the sailors that maps are suggestions written by people who are not currently seasick. A quirky tidbit clings to these voyages. Sailors sometimes brought familiar foods, religious objects, charms, and personal tokens to steady themselves in the terrifying emptiness of ocean travel. A little image of a saint, a scrap of home, a lucky habit, a muttered prayer, all of it mattered. You can imagine a man who fears sea monsters but also complains bitterly about the biscuit. Human priorities remain admirably mixed. At last, the ship reaches the southern waters near the Cape of Good Hope, though hope may not be the first word that comes to mind while waves rise like moving walls. The air is cold and violent. Spray stings the face. Ropes burn wet hands. The masts groan. Sailors shout over the wind, their voices torn away almost instantly. The ship climbs, drops, shudders, and survives. To round the cape is not just a line on a chart. It is a bodily memory of fear, salt, bruises, and stubbornness. Beyond the Cape, the ocean opens toward the east. The Portuguese enter waters already known to Swahili, Arab, Gujarati, Malayali, Persian, and other sailors. You arrive along the East African coast, where cities face the sea with coral stone, carved doors, mosques, courtyards, and markets scented with cloves in later periods, local foods, incense, ivory, cloth, and sea wind. These are not empty stepping stones for European ambition. They are cultured, commercial, multilingual worlds tied into Indian Ocean exchange. The Portuguese often misunderstand or underestimate what they meet, which is a costly habit disguised as confidence. They seek spices but also submission. They want trade, yet they bring violence as negotiation. At some ports, they bargain. At others, they intimidate. Their ships carry guns that change the atmosphere of commerce. A cannon does not improve the taste of pepper, but it does alter the price discussion. Historians still debate how much Portuguese success came from superior naval force, strategic brutality, opportunistic alliances, local rivalries, or simple persistence within a trade system they never fully controlled. The older idea that Portugal quickly dominated the entire Indian Ocean is too neat. In reality, they seized key points, disrupted routes, imposed passes, fought rivals, and built a fortified network. But local merchants and established powers continued to matter. The ocean was too vast and too experienced to be owned easily. You reach Calicut on the Malabar coast, where the air is wet, green, and fragrant. After months of salt and fear, land smells overwhelming spices, coconut oil, flowers, smoke, wet soil, fish, and human crowds. Pepper lies in sacks in markets, not as a dream, but as a commodity handled by people who already know its worth. Portuguese eyes see fortune, local merchants see new buyers, rude ones perhaps, heavily armed ones certainly, but buyers all the same. The first encounters are tense, gifts are judged, expectations clash. Portuguese goods do not always impress Indian rulers and merchants who are accustomed to luxury trade of high quality. Imagine crossing oceans at great risk, arriving with great ceremony, and discovering that your presents are being evaluated with polite disappointment. History contains many forms of humiliation, and some smell faintly of damp wool. Still, the route has been opened. Ships can sail from Lisbon around Africa to India and back, though the journey remains dangerous, expensive, and often deadly. Pepper begins to flow through Portuguese channels. Forts rise, rivalries sharpen. The Estado de India takes shape, with Goa later becoming a major centre of Portuguese power. The spice trade becomes tied to naval patrols, customs control, missionaries, diplomacy, coercion, and greed dressed in royal language. You stand again on a Lisbon quay as a returning ship unloads. The crowd gathers. Sacks of pepper are carried ashore. The smell spills into the Atlantic air, dry and hot, almost impossible after all that cold sea wind. Merchants lean in, officials count, the king's men calculate. Sailors stagger onto the land thinner, darker, and haunted by distance. Some have survived storms, hunger, illness, and violence to bring home little black berries that people will grind into dinner. The harbour bells ring, salt dries on the ropes. A spice once carried by many hands now arrives by a new ocean road, and the world shifts under its quiet weight. You step onto a wooden deck facing west, where the Atlantic stretches out like a dark blue question with no polite answer. The harbour behind you smells of smoke, oranges, horse dung, wet rope, and human excitement sharpened by fear. Ahead lies open water, brighter near the horizon, restless under the morning wind. Sails crack and swell above you. Barrels are rolled into place. Men shout, cross themselves, adjust knives, check knots, and pretend not to wonder whether the sea ends in disaster. The dream in the air is Asia. More exactly, it is the dream of reaching the spice lands by sailing west. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and other treasures glow inside European imagination. Though most sailors aboard have never seen their sources, they know the price. That is enough. Christopher Columbus believes a western route across the ocean sea can lead to the riches described in old travel accounts, especially the lands associated with India, China, and island spice markets. His calculations are wrong, but confidence, as history keeps proving, does not require accuracy. You feel the ship lean as it leaves the coast. The deck is rough beneath your feet. The smell quickly changes from harbour filth to salt, tar, damp canvas, stale water, and biscuit. The crew lives with cramped space, creaking wood, and the endless slap of waves against the hull. Nights are cold. Days are glaring. The sea is beautiful in a way that becomes annoying after the 50th horizon. There is only water, sky, rope, prayer, and the slow mathematics of supplies. A mainstream historical fact belongs firmly here. In 1492, Columbus crossed the Atlantic under Spanish sponsorship while seeking a westward route to Asia, but instead reached islands in the Caribbean. This encounter opened sustained contact between Europe and the Americas, with enormous consequences for trade, colonization, disease, violence, ecology, foodways, and global history. He did not reach the Spice Islands of Asia. He reached a world already inhabited, cultivated, named, traded, and understood by its own peoples. You arrive in the Caribbean, and the smell of land overwhelms the ship. Green leaves, flowers, warm rain, wood smoke, salt lagoons, unfamiliar fruits, and rich soil rise into the air. After weeks of dry biscuit and fear, even damp vegetation smells like paradise. The water shines pale turquoise near the shore. Birds flash between trees. The sand is bright. People watch from the beach, curious, cautious, and entirely unaware that strangers have arrived carrying not just metal tools and cloth, but world-altering assumptions. Columbus searches through this new landscape with an old desire. He wants signs of Asia. He wants gold. He wants spices. He asks, points, interprets, misunderstands. He sees plants and tries to fit them into European categories of value. Some scents seem promising. Some roots, barks, and peppers are tested. The Caribbean does offer powerful flavours, but not the Asian spices he expected. Still, one plant family will become deeply important in global cuisine: chili peppers, already cultivated and used across parts of the Americas. You hold a small chili in your hand, glossy and bright. It may be red, green, yellow, or nearly black depending on the variety. It looks cheerful, which is rather rude considering what it can do to an unsuspecting mouth. You bite carefully. Heat blooms fast, sharper and more direct than black pepper. It spreads across the tongue, wakes the eyes, warms the face. This is not the spice Columbus came to find, yet it will travel farther than his intentions. Within generations, chilies will move across Europe, Africa, and Asia, transforming cuisines from India to Thailand, China to Hungary, Mexico to West Africa. A quirky tidbit sits in the naming. Europeans called these American chilies peppers because their heat reminded them of black pepper, the famous Asian spice they already valued. It is a botanical mix-up with enormous culinary consequences. The word pepper becomes a little crowded, forced to host both wrinkled berries from Indian vines and fiery fruits from American plants. Language simply shrugs and makes room, as it often does when dinner is involved. You walk through an indigenous Caribbean garden. The soil is warm underfoot. Cassava grows nearby, along with maize, beans, squash, sweet potatoes, fruits, herbs, and medicinal plants. Smoke drifts from cooking fires. Food is being grated, roasted, boiled, wrapped, shared. Local knowledge is precise and old. Plants are not novelties here. They're kin, tools, medicines, flavours, and seasonal markers. Europeans often fail to understand this depth, because conquest has a terrible habit of mistaking unfamiliarity for emptiness. The air carries roasted fish, cassava bread, fruit, and chilly heat. You hear leaves shifting in the wind, low voices, water against the shore, and the creak of Spanish boats offshore. The atmosphere is beautiful and uneasy. A meeting of worlds is not automatically a meeting of equals. Trade begins. but so do demands, claims, captivity, forced labor, and violence. The spice dream is braided with suffering. A gentle telling cannot pretend otherwise, though it need not dwell in darkness. Historians still debate how Columbus understood the lands he encountered, and how much he knowingly forced evidence to fit his belief that he had reached Asia. His writings show confusion, ambition, religious imagination, commercial pressure, and a stubborn desire to interpret new places through old maps. Some scholars emphasize genuine geographical misunderstanding, others stress political self-interest. Both can be true. People can be sincerely mistaken and conveniently mistaken at the same time. As Spanish voyages continue, the search for Asian wealth expands into conquest of American lands. Gold and silver begin to overshadow the original spice obsession in many imperial plans. Yet flavor quietly reshapes the planet. Chilies travel eastward with astonishing speed. Vanilla, allspice, cacao, and later other American crops enter global exchange. From the Old World come sugarcane, citrus, livestock, wheat, and diseases with devastating impact. The Columbian Exchange is not a single trade. It is a biological storm. You stand in a Spanish kitchen some decades later, where someone dries chilies near a hearth. The room smells of smoke, garlic, oil, and unfamiliar heat. A cook crushes the dried fruit into powder, perhaps still uncertain how best to use it. The colour stains the fingers red. The taste is exciting, alarming, cheap to grow, and powerful in small amounts. That is a winning combination. Unlike many Asian spices, chiles can adapt to new climates and be cultivated widely. The luxury spice becomes, in many places, a people's spice across oceans. Cooks will claim chili as if it had always belonged to them. In India, it will join older traditions of pepper, ginger, turmeric, cumin, coriander, and mustard. In Southeast Asia, it will become essential to fiery pastes and soups. In China, it will transform regional cuisines. In Africa, it will deepen stews and sauces. In Europe, it will colour sausages, stews, and powders. No empire controls taste completely. Once a plant roots itself in local soil and appetite, it begins a new life. Back on the Caribbean shore, the evening sky turns rose and gold. Spanish ships sit at anchor. Smoke rises from indigenous homes. The sea glows softly, indifferent to names placed upon it. Columbus has not found the Spice Islands. He has found something larger, though he cannot fully see it, a new geography of flavour, tangled with conquest, exchange, loss, adaptation, and survival. You breathe in salt air, flowers, smoke, cassava, and chill. The spice he sought remains across another ocean, but the heat in your hand is already changing the world. You arrive in the Banda Islands with the sea still moving in your body, that slow inner sway that lingers after a voyage. The air is hot, wet, and green beyond belief. Hills rise from blue water like sleeping animals covered in a forest. Clouds gather around volcanic peaks. The shore smells of salt, rotting leaves, wood smoke, drying fish, and a sweetness you cannot place at first. Then the breeze shifts, and you catch it nutmeg, warm and rounded, almost buttery, with a shadow of pine and clove. Here, the world narrows to a cluster of small islands and widens into a global obsession. Nutmeg and mace grow from the same fruit, a botanical little miracle that seems designed to make merchants lose all dignity. The nutmeg is the seed. Mace is the red, lace-like covering around it, called the aril, one fruit, two spices, very efficient and frankly a little smug. You walk beneath nutmeg trees, their leaves glossy in the damp shade. The ground is soft with fallen fruit. A ripe nutmeg fruit splits open on the branch, pale yellow outside, revealing the dark seed wrapped in bright crimson mace. It looks like a secret exposed for just a moment before a careful hand gathers it. The mace is peeled away and dried, turning from scarlet to orange. The seed is dried too, slowly, until the kernel inside can be separated from its shell. The work requires skill, patience, and local knowledge carried through generations. A mainstream historical fact belongs to these islands for centuries. The Banda Islands were the world's principal source of nutmeg and mace, while nearby Maluku, often called the Moluccas or Spice Islands by outsiders, was the major source of cloves. These spices were not merely valuable because they tasted good. They were valuable because they grew in extremely limited places, and that rarity made them irresistible to distant traders. You step into a village where houses stand near groves and paths damp from rain. The atmosphere is busy but not rushed. People sort fruit, dry spices, repair boats, tend gardens, and prepare food. Smoke curls from cooking fires. You hear children, chickens, waves, insects, and the soft scrape of tools. Nutmeg is not a mysterious luxury here. It is part of the landscape, part of labour, part of everyday understanding. The islanders know the trees, the seasons, the winds, the drying process, the buyers, and the danger of outsiders wanting too much. Nearby, cloves grow in other island worlds of Maluku. You move through clove groves where the unopened flower buds are harvested before they bloom. Fresh cloves are pinkish, then dry into the dark brown nail-shaped spice familiar in distant kitchens. The scent is powerful, medicinal, sweet, and sharp. It numbs the mouth slightly when chewed, which explains its long use in toothache remedies. A small clove bud carries a strength that feels almost exaggerated, like a tiny nobleman entering a room and demanding attention. In island markets, traders from Java, Malay ports, China, India, Arabia, and elsewhere have long participated in exchange. Cloth, rice, metal goods, ceramics, beads, and other items arrive. Spices leave. The region is not isolated, waiting quietly to be discovered by Europeans with damp hats and dramatic maps. It is connected, intelligent, and commercially experienced. The sea between islands is not a barrier. It is a road, a workplace, a story path, a dangerous friend. You sit near the shore at dusk while a boat is loaded. Nutmeg sacks are tied tightly. Bundles of mace are protected from moisture. Cloves are packed with care. The planks creak under the weight. The smell is intoxicating, as if a whole winter festival from a far northern country has somehow been squeezed into a tropical harbour. Except here there is no snow, no frost, no cosy bakery window. There is humid air, mosquito song, and the serious business of making sure the cargo survives. A quirky tidbit hangs around nutmeg like perfume in parts of early modern Europe. Some people believed nutmeg could help protect against plague or bad air. They carried it, sniffed it, grated it into mixtures, and treated its strong aroma as a kind of invisible shield. The confidence was greater than the medical proof, naturally. But in a world terrified of disease and foul smells, a fragrant seed from distant islands felt like comfort you could hold in your pocket. Spices from these islands enter medicine, cooking, perfumery, and ritual. Cloves warm wine and sauces. Nutmeg enriches meats, sweets, drinks, and medicines. Mace adds a lighter, floral warmth. Their flavours travel far from the trees that made them. In Europe, they become winter flavours. In the Middle East and South Asia, they join complex spice mixtures. In China and Southeast Asia, cloves and nutmeg find roles in medicine and cuisine. Each region receives the same spice differently, giving it new meanings without asking the tree's permission. Historians still debate the exact shape of the earliest clove and nutmeg trade, especially how goods moved through Southeast Asian networks before outsiders wrote about them in detail. Archaeological finds suggest cloves travelled remarkably far in antiquity, but reconstructing the routes is difficult. A spice can move through many ports before reaching a final buyer, leaving little trace except scent, a name in a text, or a residue in a vessel. The islands speak clearly through their trees, but records from distant observers often speak through confusion. You feel the atmosphere darken as foreign ambition gathers round these shores. First come stories, then ships, then demands. Portuguese sailors enter the region in the 16th century, seeking the sources of cloves, nutmeg, and mace. Spanish claims hover from across the Pacific world. Later, Dutch and English traders push harder, backed by companies and guns. The islanders are not passive. They negotiate, resist, ally, evade, and adapt. But the spices are too valuable for distant powers to behave politely for long. For now, you remain in the grove, before the full force of monopoly tightens. Rain begins again, warm on your skin. It drums softly on leaves and rooftops. A split nutmeg fruit lies in your palm, yellow flesh open, red mace curled around the seed like flame. It is beautiful in a way that feels almost private. The spice that will stir greed across oceans begins as something quiet, growing in rain and shade. Night settles over the Banda Islands, insects sing, waves breathe against coral and sand, smoke rises from houses, drying racks are covered carefully against moisture. Somewhere, a clove bud is turned by hand. Somewhere, nutmeg seeds rest in the dark, losing water, gaining value. You inhale the island air, sweet, damp, smoky, and alive. The world wants these spices desperately, but here they are not symbols. They are trees, fruit, hands, weather, and home. You enter the age of chartered companies through the smell of wet timber, ink, gunpowder, and cloves locked in a ship's hold. The sea is grey under a hard morning sky. Ropes creak, men shout from decks slick with spray. A flag snaps in the wind, and beneath it, commerce has learned to wear armour. The spice trade is no longer only a web of merchants, port towns, seasonal winds, and careful bargaining. It is becoming corporate, militarised, and chillingly organised. You stand in Amsterdam, where canals reflect narrow houses and warehouse roofs. The air smells of river water, peat smoke, damp wool, beer, tar, and imported spice stored behind thick doors. Clerks hurry with papers held close against drizzle. Investors gather in rooms warmed by stoves and ambition. They discuss voyages not as romantic adventures, but as shares, risks, dividends, fleets, forts, and cargo yields. Pepper, nutmeg, mace, and cloves become numbers on pages before they become flavours on tongues. A mainstream historical fact belongs here: the Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, became one of the most powerful trading corporations in world history. Granted authority by the Dutch Republic to trade, make treaties, build forts, maintain armies, and wage war in parts of Asia. It was not simply a company in the modern mild sense, like a business selling shoes with an annoying logo. It operated with state-backed force, and in the Spice Islands, that force became severe. You enter a counting house where spice samples sit beside ledgers. The room is quiet except for scratching quills and the faint hiss of rain at the window. A clerk records quantities of cloves and nutmeg with careful handwriting. Another calculates expected profit. A director examines reports from Asia. The paper smells of ink and damp fibres. The spices smell warmer than the room, as if they have brought tropical heat into the Dutch chill. You touch a nutmeg seed. It is hard, smooth, and untroubled by the human machinery surrounding it. The company's hunger centres fiercely on monopoly. If nutmeg grows mainly in the Banda Islands, then controlling Banda means controlling nutmeg. If cloves grow in Maluku, then controlling clove trees means controlling clove prices. In theory, monopoly is tidy. In practice, it requires violence, surveillance, destruction of unwanted crops, forced agreements, patrols, and punishment. A fragrant spice can be made to carry a very bitter history. You walk through Batavia, the Dutch colonial capital on Java, later called Jakarta. The air is humid and heavy with canal water, spice, sweat, cooking smoke, and disease. Warehouses line the waterfront. Ships from across Asia and Europe crowd the harbour. Chinese merchants, Javanese labourers, Dutch officials, enslaved people, sailors, soldiers, scribes, and local traders move through a city built for extraction and control. The company is bureaucratic, but the street is alive with many languages and lives that never fit neatly into ledgers. A quirky tidbit appears in the company's almost obsessive paperwork. The Dutch East India Company generated mountains of record ship logs, cargo lists, letters, contracts, legal proceedings, maps, instructions, and inventories. It is strangely fitting that one of history's most ruthless spice empires also became one of history's greatest producers of paperwork. Apparently, even coercion preferred a filing system. Somewhere, a clerk probably ruined a beautiful morning by asking for 3 copies of a clove report. You move toward the Banda Islands, where monopoly becomes brutal. In the early 17th century, Dutch forces sought to force local leaders into exclusive contracts and suppress independent trade with others, including English and Asian merchants. When resistance continued, violence followed. Communities were devastated. Land was reorganized into plantations controlled by Dutch interests, worked by enslaved and coerced laborers brought from various regions. The smell of nutmeg remained sweet, but the world around it had been made harsh. You stand at the edge of a nutmeg grove after rain. Leaves drip softly, the soil is dark, the air is fragrant, almost peaceful, and that peace feels uncomfortable because it hides so much. Workers gather fruit under watchful authority. The mace glows red around the seed. Drying racks stand beneath shelters. Each stage is monitored. Who grows, who harvests, who sells, who profits. All of it is controlled by people far from the tree's original meanings. Clove production faces its own restrictions. In parts of Maluku, the company tried to limit cultivation to controlled areas, sometimes ordering trees destroyed elsewhere to prevent smuggling and preserve high prices. Imagine a tree punished for being too successful. The absurdity would be funny if it were not tied to hunger, displacement, and fear. A clove bud, tiny and fragrant, becomes evidence in a war over supply. The spice trade now depends on forts, ships, passes, and patrols. You board a Dutch vessel carrying cloves westward. The hold is dark and close. The smell is overwhelming, medicinal and sweet, seeping into wood, rope, cloth, and skin. Sailors sleep above cargo worth more than most will ever see. Rats scratch somewhere in the planks. Water sloshes in barrels. The ship groans through the ocean, part warehouse, part weapon, part floating argument that profit deserves cannons. Yet the company never controls everything perfectly. Smuggling continues. Local networks adapt. Rival Europeans interfere. Asian traders remain essential in many places. Spices slip through cracks because human systems always leak. A few seeds, a hidden bundle, a friendly harbour, a silent agreement. All can weaken the fantasy of total control. Monopoly sounds clean in a boardroom, in humid islands with boats, cousins, storms, and memory. It becomes much harder. Historians still argue over how to balance the story of Dutch commercial innovation with the violence that sustained its spice profits. Some focus on finance, global trade, joint stock structures, and administrative systems. Others emphasize colonial coercion, massacre, forced labor, environmental control, and the destruction of local autonomy. Both belong to the same history. The ledger and the musket are not separate chapters. They sit at the same table, sharing the same clove-scented air. You return to a European home where nutmeg is grated over a warm drink. The room is dim and cold. A fire snaps in the hearth. The smell rises gently, comforting and domestic. Someone smiles, holding the cup in both hands. They may know the spice is expensive. They may know it came from distant islands. They almost certainly do not know every wound hidden inside its journey. Consumption has always had a way of softening the edges of suffering it does not wish to see. Outside, rain taps the window. Inside, the nutmeg warms the milk or wine, making the night feel kinder. This is the uneasy power of spices. They can carry pleasure and pain together, sweetness and exploitation, refinement and violence. The same clove that numbs a tooth can sharpen an empire's greed. The same mace that perfumes a feast can mark the loss of a homeland. You stand between warehouse and grove, ledger and fruit, ship and kitchen. The air is filled with spice, but also with ink, salt, gunpowder, wet leaves, and human breath. The age of companies has made flavour into a system, and the system is efficient, profitable, and deeply restless. A chest closes, a seal is pressed into wax, somewhere across the sea, a nutmeg fruit splits open in the rain. You enter Britain through mist, coal smoke, wet cobblestones, and the smell of tea rising from a porcelain cup. The day is grey in that particular island way, as if the sky has decided to become a damp blanket and call it weather. Carriage wheels hiss through muddy streets, shop bells ring. Somewhere inside a warm room, sugar clicks against china, milk swirls pale into dark liquid, and a pinch of spice waits nearby. Quiet but not forgotten. By the 18th century, spices have become part of a wider British world of flavour, commerce, and empire. Pepper still matters. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, mace, ginger, mustard, and allspice appear in kitchens, apothecaries, taverns, bakeries, and colonial warehouses. Yet the story is no longer only about rare Eastern spices. It is about blended habits. Tea, sugar, rum, curry powders, pickles, sauces, chutneys, spiced cakes, and preserved foods begin to shape daily life. Empire does not simply conquer territory. It rearranges breakfast. You step into a London grocer's shop. The windows are fogged from the cold outside. Inside, shelves hold jars, packets, tins, bottles, sacks, and boxes from unsettlingly many parts of the world. The air smells of roasted coffee, tea leaves, molasses, soap, tobacco, dried fruit, pepper, cinnamon, and floorboards scrubbed with effort. A clerk weighs ginger on a scale, then folds it neatly into paper. Behind the counter, spices are not displayed like holy relics anymore. They are still valued, but they are becoming more available to the growing middle classes. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. The British East India Company became a major force in Asian trade, and later colonial rule, especially in India, and it helped channel goods, tastes, and habits between Britain and Asia. The company began as a trading enterprise, but over time gained political and military power. Its history is tied not only to spices, but to textiles, tea, opium, taxation, warfare, administration, and the transformation of entire societies. A teacup can look innocent on a saucer. History, inconveniently, refuses to stay inside the cup. You move into an English dining room where tea is served in the afternoon. The fire gives off a soft crackle. The carpet muffles footsteps. The tea smells grassy, tannic, warm, and slightly bitter. Sugar sweetens it. Milk softens it. A plate of spiced buns or gingerbread sits nearby. Fragrant with ginger, cinnamon, and nutmeg, teastus, and cloves. This comfort rests on vast systems of labour and trade tea from China and later India, sugar from Caribbean plantations built on enslaved labour, spices from Asian roots, porcelain inspired by Chinese wares, and manners polished into ceremony. There is gentle absurdity in the ritual. People speak calmly over cups while the world that supplied those cups is anything but calm. Someone worries about the correct angle of a teaspoon while ships cross oceans, plantations expand, taxes bite, and merchants speculate. Civilization has always had an impressive talent for placing lace over turbulence. You step into a kitchen where British cooks mix local and imported tastes. Mustard sharpens meat. Nutmeg is grated into puddings, sauces, and warm drinks. Mace scents broths. Ginger appears in biscuits, cakes, beer, and preserves. Pepper seasons nearly everything that can tolerate being awakened. Pickling becomes a practical art, using vinegar, salt, mustard seed, peppercorns, cloves, and ginger to stretch seasonal abundance into winter safety. The kitchen smells of vinegar steam, onions, spices, flour, butter, and hot metal. A quirky tidbit rises from the world of curry powder. In Britain, ready-made curry powders became popular as simplified commercial blends meant to capture, or rather politely misunderstand, the complexity of South Asian cooking. They offered a convenient taste of empire in a jar, often built around turmeric, coriander, cumin, fenugreek, pepper, ginger, and other spices. It is a very British move, really meet a vast culinary civilization. turn it into a standardized powder, then label it confidently. In India, of course, spice traditions are far older, more regional, and more precise than any imported British tin can suggest. You walk through a market in Madras, Calcutta, or Bombay during the colonial period, and the air is alive with roasted cumin, mustard seeds popping in oil, turmeric staining cloth and fingers, coriander, cardamom, cloves, cinnamon, black pepper, fresh ginger, garlic, tamarind, curry leaves, and chilies. Vendors call out, crows argue overhead, the heat presses on your skin. Spices here are not novelty, they are grammar. British officials, soldiers, merchants, missionaries, and families encounter these food worlds in uneven, complicated ways. Some resist local flavours, some adapt. Some rely on Indian cooks and servants who prepare meals that gradually change British taste. Dishes move through households, cantonments, clubs, and ship kitchens, mulligatawny soup, kedgeree, chutneys, potted meats with spice, devilled dishes, and curry-like preparations enter Anglo-Indian and British repertoires. The results are hybrid, sometimes delicious, sometimes deeply confused, and often revealing. Historians still argue over how much British taste for spiced food came from genuine culinary exchange, colonial nostalgia, domestic marketing, military life, or the labour of Indian cooks whose names were rarely recorded. Cookbooks preserve recipes, but not always the hands that made them practical. Household accounts show purchases, but not every conversation in the kitchen. The archive often credits the diner more than the cook, which is rude but sadly common. You move through a dockyard where spices arrive in barrels and chests. The smells of empire crowd the air tea: pepper, sugar, rum, indigo, hemp, tar, wet wood, and smoke from factories. Workers unload cargo under a sky stained by industry. Britain's appetite is tied to machines now, to finance, insurance, newspapers, advertisements, and urban consumers who want exotic flavour at respectable prices. Spice becomes packaged, branded, and morally distant. In a modest home, a woman opens a tin of curry powder and adds it to leftovers. The pan hisses, onion, fat, stock, and spice release a warm yellow smell. It is not the careful layering of a South Asian kitchen, but it is part of a new domestic reality. Empire enters as convenience. The family eats, perhaps pleased by the heat, perhaps reassured by the novelty being made safely familiar. Night gathers outside. Rain taps the window. Tea cools in cups. Gingerbread rests on a plate. The room is quiet, but the flavours inside it are crowded with oceans, plantations, ports, clerks, cooks, soldiers, merchants, and colonised labour. Britain has taken spices into daily life not as jewels, but as habit. You breathe in tea, coal smoke, nutmeg, ginger, and damp wool. The empire is in the cupboard now, folded into supper, hidden in sweetness, stirred into sauce, and poured carefully into porcelain. You leave the grand warehouses and imperial counting rooms and enter the smaller places where history becomes dinner. A kitchen door opens, warm air rolls out, carrying onion, smoke, pepper, old wood, boiling beans, damp laundry, and bread cooling on a table. The floor is worn smooth where generations of feet have crossed it. A spoon taps the side of a pot. Someone laughs in the next room. Someone else tells a child not to touch the hot pan, which the child immediately considers a personal challenge. Spices in ordinary homes do not always arrive as luxury. They arrive as habit, remedy, memory, and thrift. A pinch of pepper can brighten cabbage. A scrape of nutmeg can soften a milk pudding. Mustard can wake cold meat from its sad little nap. Ginger can warm a winter drink. Cinnamon can make stale bread feel forgiven. The old global networks have become quieter here, folded into household routines, measured not by the chest or a sack, but by the spoon, pinch, and careful shake. You stand beside a wooden table in a town kitchen. The surface is nicked by knives and darkened by use. A small spice box sits near the salt. Its lid opens with a dry creak. Inside are modest treasures: peppercorns, mustard seed, cloves, cinnamon, ginger, maybe mace, maybe caraway, depending on the place and century. The box smells stronger than it looks. It is a cupboard-sized map of the world, though no one pauses dramatically to announce that. They are busy making supper, which is often how the world is changed. A mainstream historical fact belongs to this domestic scene as global trade expanded and prices shifted. Many spices that had once been rare luxuries became increasingly accessible to wider urban and rural households, though access remained unequal. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves moved gradually from elite tables into bakeries, taverns, apothecaries, street food, preserved foods, and family recipes. The transformation was not instant. It happened unevenly, by region, income, season, fashion, and opportunity. You enter a bakery before sunrise. The room is hot and close, fogged with flour and steam. Dough rests under cloths. Ovens glow red. Gingerbread dough is rolled and cut, rich with molasses or honey. Ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and pepper in some versions. The smell is dark, sweet, and warming, the sort of smell that makes people believe life may be manageable after all. Outside, the street is cold. Inside, spice turns flour into comfort. Street vendors carry flavour into public life. You walk through a market where carts and stalls crowd the lanes. Hot pies steam under cloth covers. Spiced sausages hiss over coals. Roasted nuts are dusted with salt or sugar. Pickles sit in brine with mustard seed and peppercorns. A vendor ladles soup into bowls, adding a sharp relish to wake the broth. The sounds are bright coins dropped into palms, wheels jolting over stones, sellers calling, dogs barking, boots splashing through puddles. Spice here is not noble. It is practical pleasure sold by the mouthful. In apothecaries, spices keep their medical dignity. You step into a shop with glass bottles, drawers, scales, dried roots, labels, and a faint smell of alcohol, herbs, and dust. Ginger is sold for digestion, cloves for toothache, cinnamon for warming mixtures, fennel and anise for stomach complaints, pepper for stimulation. Some remedies help, some mostly make illness smell expensive, but the connection between spice and care remains strong. A sick person receives something warm, sweet, bitter, or sharp, and the body feels noticed. A quirky tidbit appears in the habit of carrying personal spice containers. In some times and places, wealthier travellers or diners use small spice boxes, pomanders, or scented containers, partly for comfort, partly for health, partly to avoid the horror of unseasoned food away from home. Imagine arriving at dinner and discreetly producing your own nutmeg grater. It is both practical and slightly dramatic, like saying, "I trust your hospitality, but not your sauce." You enter a rural home where the spice supply is small and guarded. The walls smell of smoke and stored apples. Herbs hang from beams. A pot of oats or beans simmers near the hearth. The family cannot spend freely on imported flavour, but they use what they have with care. Caraway goes into bread. Mustard seed seasons pickles. Local herbs brighten fat and grain. A single clove may scent a holiday dish. A little cinnamon may be saved for birth, wedding, winter feast, or funeral meal. Scarcity gives spice emotional weight. It is not everyday sparkle. It is occasion. Food traditions grow from this careful use. In Northern Europe, warm spices enter cakes, biscuits, puddings, sausages, mulled drinks, and preserved fruits. In the Mediterranean, cumin, coriander, saffron, cinnamon, and pepper join olive oil, wine, citrus, nuts, and herbs. In South Asia, spice remains central, layered through tempering, roasting, grinding, and regional masalas. In Southeast Asia, fresh aromatics, chilies, turmeric, galangal, lemongrass, and shrimp pastes create vivid balances. In West Africa, grains of paradise, chilies, ginger, cloves, and local seeds enrich stews and sauces. Everywhere, spices become local by being repeated. Historians still debate how much printed cookbooks changed everyday spice use compared with oral tradition. Apprenticeship, migration, and household memory. Books spread recipes, especially among literate and wealthier groups. But many cooks learned by watching hands, smelling pots, and being corrected by someone older who said, with devastating calm, "Not like that." The written recipe is only one path into flavour. The kitchen has always had its own school. You stand in a family room at night. Rain taps the roof. A child sleeps near the hearth. Someone grates nutmeg into warm milk. Someone crushes pepper for tomorrow's stew. Someone ties herbs in cloth to hang in a draughty corner. The atmosphere is not grand, but it is rich with continuity. Spices become part of care. It marks cold evenings, upset stomachs, festival mornings, market days, travellers returning, guests welcomed, and grief softened with food. The empire may claim a spice in a ledger, the merchant may price it in a shop, the physician may classify it by heat and dryness, but the household gives it a different life. Here, spice is the smell that says someone remembered what you like. Someone saved the best pinch. Someone made ordinary food warmer. Someone turned distance into kindness. You breathe in cinnamon, pepper, mustard, smoke, bread, vinegar, and wool drying by the fire. Outside, the world is wide, loud, and restless. Inside, a small box closes softly, holding enough fragrance for another meal. You enter the modern age through a doorway that smells of steam, metal, paper labels, dried bark, and laboratory alcohol. The old spice chest has not vanished, but it now shares space with glass jars, printed tins, factory scales, microscopes, botanical drawings, shipping manifests, and machines that grind faster than any patient hand. The world is still hungry for flavour, but it wants flavour sorted, classified, standardised, packaged, and sold with a label that looks trustworthy from a respectable distance. You stand in a botanical garden where plants from many climates grow under careful supervision. The air changes from bed to bed, pepper vines in humid glass houses, cinnamon trees with glossy leaves, clove saplings, ginger leaves rising from buried rhizomes, cardamom plants hiding their pods close to the ground, vanilla orchids climbing supports. Labels identify Latin names, origins, collectors, and dates. The garden is beautiful, but also imperial. Knowledge here is not innocent. Plants are being studied, moved, tested, and sometimes stolen from the conditions that once made them rare. A mainstream historical fact belongs to this age. European empires and scientific institutions worked to transplant valuable spice crops into new colonies, weakening older monopolies and expanding plantation production. Cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, vanilla, and other crops were moved, cultivated, and commercialized in new regions. What had once depended on narrow geography could now be spread through botanical experiment, colonial administration, and coerced or poorly paid labour. The spice world became less mysterious, but not necessarily more fair. You walk through a plantation where rows of spice plants are arranged with practical neatness. The soil is warm underfoot, leaves whisper in a humid breeze. Workers move between trees, cutting, gathering, drying, sorting. The scent is pleasant, but the labour is hard. Cinnamon bark must be peeled, pepper berries must be harvested and dried, cloves must be picked at the right moment. Vanilla requires patient hand pollination in many regions outside its native range, because the original pollinators are not present. Every sweet bottle of vanilla extract has a quiet army of fingers behind it. A quirky tidbit blooms around vanilla. The vanilla orchid produces long green pods, but in many places it does not fruit well unless humans pollinate each flower by hand. In the 19th century, a young enslaved worker on Reunion Island, Edmund Albius, developed a practical hand pollination method that helped transform vanilla into a global crop. A plant famous for sweetness carries a story of skill, exploitation, and a child's remarkable observation. History does enjoy hiding enormous consequences inside tiny flowers. You step into a 19th century laboratory. The room smells sharp, clean, and faintly medicinal. Glass vessels catch the light. Powders sit in labelled jars. Chemists analyse aromatic compounds, essential oils, alkaloids, and volatile substances that give spices their character. Cinnamon has cinnamaldehyde, cloves carry eugenol, black pepper contains piperine, chilies contain capsaicin, turmeric offers curcumin. Names become keys, turning scent into chemistry. The spice is still sensual, but now it is also molecular. Science changes trust. Merchants and officials can test for adulteration more effectively. Ground spices are convenient, but they invite fraud. Paprika can be stretched with brick dust or coloured fillers. Pepper can be mixed with husks. Cinnamon can be replaced with cheaper cassia and sold under a comforting name. Mustard powder can be bulked out. The powdered spice jar is a miracle of convenience and a small invitation to mischief. Apparently, when humanity learned to grind spices industrially, it also learned to grind ethics into a fine powder. You enter a factory where spice mills roar softly in the background. The air is almost overwhelming. Pepper dust tickles the nose until workers sneeze. Cinnamon floats warm and sweet through wooden rafters. Ginger stings the throat. Clove seems to cling to everything, including coats, hair, and probably private thoughts. Machines sort, dry, grind, blend, and package. Tins are stamped. Paper labels promise purity, strength, freshness, exotic origin, domestic reliability, or whatever else the marketing department believes will persuade a careful housewife, a busy cook, or a grocer with shelf space. Packaging changes the relationship between people and spice. In earlier households, spices were often bought whole, inspected, smelled, and ground as needed. Now brands promise consistency. A jar of cinnamon should taste like the last jar. A curry powder should look the same yellow every time. A bottle of vanilla should behave politely in cake batter. Industrial food loves repetition. The palate begins to expect standard flavour, and the spice becomes less of a mystery and more of a product. Historians and food scholars still debate whether industrialization democratized spices by making them cheaper and more available, or flattened their diversity by favouring standardized blends, large plantations, and global commodity systems. Both are true in different ways. More people could afford cinnamon, pepper, ginger, and cloves, yet local varieties, traditional processing methods, and growers' control were often reduced. Convenience arrived with a price hidden deeper than the shop counter. You open a modern supermarket spice aisle. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. The atmosphere is clean, dry, and faintly artificial. Little jars stand in obedient rows: cumin, paprika, cinnamon, oregano, nutmeg, turmeric, garlic powder, cayenne, black pepper, curry powder, pumpkin spice, garam masala, 5-spice, taco seasoning, mixed herbs. The labels are tidy. The caps match. It is strangely peaceful, and also very strange. Empires once fought over what now sits beside discount baking powder. But the old power has not disappeared. Spices still reveal inequality. Farmers may receive tiny portions of final profits. Climate change threatens delicate crops. Vanilla prices rise and fall sharply, bringing hardship to growers. Saffron remains labour-intensive. Cardamom, pepper, and cinnamon depend on weather, disease resistance, land access, and fair trade. The jar may look simple, but behind it lie fields, brokers, exporters, quality graders, ports, warehouses, and people whose names rarely reach the label. You stand in a kitchen where someone opens a jar of cinnamon. Perhaps it is true cinnamon. Perhaps it is cassia. The smell rises warm and familiar either way. The distinction matters for botanists, traders, cooks, regulators, and sometimes health discussions. But many consumers never know which bark they are using. This is the age of fake cinnamon, or at least complicated cinnamon, where labels, species, taste, price, and expectation meet in a polite little fog. A pot simmers on the stove. Tomato, onion, garlic, cumin, chile, and turmeric bloom in oil. Another counter holds cookies scented with vanilla and nutmeg. A cup of tea waits with cardamom. The old and new world sit together: ancient plants, colonial roots, chemical analysis, Factory packaging, supermarket habit, family taste. You breathe in steam, sweetness, heat, and memory. The spice has become ordinary enough to forget, and important enough that forgetting it would change everything. You stand in a quiet kitchen long after the busy world has gone still. The lights are low. The room holds the soft smells of wood, soap, cooled metal, and something faintly sweet from a jar that was not closed perfectly. Rain may be touching the window, or perhaps the night is dry and silent, with only the hum of a refrigerator and the occasional settling creak of the house. Before you is a cupboard, not a palace vault, not a company warehouse, not a guarded dock, just a cupboard with little jars waiting in the dark. You open the door, and the world opens with it. There is black pepper, rough and familiar, ready to crack under a grinder with that sharp little burst that wakes soup, eggs, vegetables, and almost anything that has been behaving too politely. There is cinnamon, soft and brown, smelling of warmth, bread, childhood sweets, winter drinks, and distant bark peeled under humid skies. There is ginger, dry and golden in powder form, or fresh and knotted in the basket, bright with heat and lemony bite. There is cumin, earthy and deep, carrying the memory of hot pans, stews, breads, and street stalls. There is turmeric, staining everything it touches with golden confidence. There is clove, tiny and dark, smelling stronger than seems reasonable for something so small. Honestly, clove has the personality of a cathedral bell. A mainstream historical fact rests in this peaceful cupboard. The modern spice shelf is the result of thousands of years of plant knowledge, trade, migration, empire, science, labour, and cooking. Spices moved through ancient medical systems, sacred rituals, caravan routes, Indian Ocean shipping, Mediterranean markets, medieval feasts, colonial plantations, industrial factories, and modern supermarkets. Every jar is a small archive. It does not look dramatic because it has learned to fit neatly behind the baking soda. You lift a jar of nutmeg. The glass is cool in your hand. Inside, whole seeds knock softly against each other, dry and round. When grated, the smell rises slowly, creamy, woody, and warm. It can turn custard, spinach, rice pudding, sauces, cakes, and warm milk into something deeper. Yet this comforting scent once came from a small cluster of islands so fiercely desired that distant powers crossed oceans to control it. The spice feels gentle now, but history is still folded inside it like a dark line in polished wood. Next is paprika, red as sunset dust. Its story carries the chili pepper, born in the Americas, carried across oceans, planted into new soils, and adopted so completely by distant cuisines that it now seems native to many of them. Sweet paprika, smoked paprika, hot paprika. Each one speaks differently. In one kitchen it colours stew, in another it seasons sausage, in another it joins rice, beans, potatoes, or roasted vegetables. A fruit renamed as pepper becomes powder, and powder becomes identity. Language may be confused, but dinner is grateful. You touch a jar of cardamom pods. They are pale green, ridged, and light. Crush one, and the scent leaps out, floral, resinous, citrusy, almost cool. It perfumes coffee in one place, tea in another, rice in another, sweets in another. It can feel luxurious, medicinal, homely, or festive depending on the pot it enters. Cardamom is a little reminder that spices are never only global, they become intimate by being repeated in particular homes. A quirky tidbit waits among spice blends. Many famous mixtures have no single fixed recipe. Garam masala, ras el hanout, baharat, 5-spice, curry powder, jerk seasoning, berber, pumpkin spice, za'atar, and countless household blends shift by family, region, shop, season, and mood. A spice blend can be a signature, an inheritance, a quiet argument with your auntie, or a secret nobody admits is mostly purchased from a trusted vendor. Tradition is often less rigid than people pretend. It breathes, It adjusts. It tastes. Then adds a little more cumin. You open a jar of vanilla. It is not a spice in the same way pepper is, yet it belongs in this scented family of global flavour. The liquid is dark and sweet, floral and soft. Vanilla became common enough that people now call ordinary things plain vanilla, which is rather unfair to an orchid that requires delicate cultivation, careful curing, and a long history of botanical travel. Plain vanilla is not plain. It is just famous enough to be taken for granted, which happens to many hard-working wonders. Scholars still debate how best to tell the story of spices. Is it a history of desire, trade, ecology, medicine, empire, cuisine, labour, or imagination? The answer depends on where you stand. In a farmer's field, spice history is weather, soil, debt, skill, and harvest. In a port, it is cargo, tax, and risk. In a palace, it is status. In a temple, it is fragrance rising toward the unseen. In a kitchen, it is taste. In a sick room, it is comfort. The same seed can mean many things without changing shape. You close your eyes and breathe the cupboard's mingled air. Pepper pricks the nose. Cinnamon softens it. Cumin settles low and earthy. Clove rings darkly. Ginger brightens. Turmeric glows without needing to be seen. These smells have crossed languages and religions, oceans and deserts, recipes and remedies. They have been guarded, faked, taxed, praised, stolen, planted, studied, blended, and sprinkled over weekday dinners by people too tired to think about world history. And that is the quiet miracle. Spices began as plants rooted in particular places, shaped by rain, insects, soil, sun, and human care. They became stories because humans carried them. They became power because humans priced them. They became empire because humans tried to control them. They became ordinary because humans cooked with them often enough to forget how extraordinary they were. The cupboard door remains open. The room is still, somewhere far away. Pepper vines climb in wet heat. Cinnamon bark dries in curling strips. Cardamom pods hide beneath leaves. Clove buds harden in the sun. Vanilla orchids open briefly. Chiles ripen bright in fields. Saffron flowers bloom low to the ground, offering threads that must be gathered by hand. The world is not distant at all. It is here, quiet, labelled, and waiting for tomorrow's meal. You place the jar back on the shelf. Glass touches wood with a small, final sound. The scents settle around you like a soft blanket. And now the story can loosen its grip. The kitchen grows dimmer, the jars rest in their rows, holding rainforests, islands, deserts, harbours, gardens, ships, markets, and hands you will never know. Their fragrances fade into the calm of the room, not gone, only sleeping beneath their lids. Your breathing slows. The night outside becomes wide and gentle. No caravans move now. No sails strain against the wind. No ledgers wait for ink. Only a quiet cupboard, a cooled stove, a trace of cinnamon in the air, and the soft knowledge that even the smallest things can carry the longest journeys. Let the pepper vines climb in dreams. Let the clove trees flower in warm rain. Let the sea lie still under moonlight. The world has been flavoured enough for tonight.